Chapter 21, Red Constellation, 2. Taurus. Help me. I am incapable. I know you can do it. You are the strongest amongst all of us. I also know that this seal is not completely. Why? This is because you must help me. I need to be restored to my body immediately and return to Constellation. I regret I cannot comply. Taurus. You are not the will of the world, nor are you one of those stupid gods. Why do you want to be stubborn like them? Ignorant. Please, Taurus. I met a child. He may be the only newborn mystic in 1,000 years. What does that have to do with me? Why can you not comprehend? We are only 14 mystics. With him and we would have 15 mystics. We are all one unified entity. Believe me, Taurus. We all coexist and live with one another even if our journeys are different. Do you remember Blood Spike Helen? That is different. I will never admit them as one of us. They betrayed us. Everyone has a choice. That's what it was. We are not mankind. Choices has nothing to do with race. Then I have made a choice. I choose to be a mystic. Don't you want to see us stand freely on top of the world? I had a choice, that's all. Taurus. That child needs guidance. Otherwise, sooner or later he would. That is fate. Third grade apprentice of Soul Tower, Taurus Mill. Do not forget. You are the one that killed the people of the mountains and ocean. You are the one that started the war. You are our first role model. If it was not because of you, everything else would not have happened. Taurus. Help me. Help me. Wait. Thales raised his hand and interrupted Gilbert's slightly sorrowful words. The Jadestar's family bloodlines were slaughtered until almost none were left? Who did this? Gilbert simply gave him a sad look. Thales narrowed his eyes. There were already some problems in the earlier words. You said that my grandfather, 82, had a long and stable rule and was known as King of Eternal Rule? Then what happened during the rebellion in the Bloody Year? Great Order brought an armed rebellion? That is totally illogical. Thales looked at Gilbert. However, Gilbert simply patted the book once with his hand and frowned slightly. The gray-haired middle-aged noble calmly said, there are many reasons for the Bloody Year. It is also very complicated. Some information is even limited only to high-ranking officials. You will know this in future lessons. When you become the official heir, with the right to access all these secrets, it would not be too late to know then. Right now, I can only tell you that His Majesty has already taken revenge on all the enemies that he could. The hidden dangers have already been basically resolved. As for the remaining enemies, revenge either cannot be carried out or is impossible. Thales narrowed his eyes. Basically resolved? He had a hunch that the incident a dozen years ago was extremely important to him. Gilbert continued his recounting with compassion and grief. During that year, the 5 central territories encountered a lot of natural disasters and crop failures. 6 cities in southwest started an armed rebellion. The army that was supposed to stop the rebellion had a mutiny. The Baron Bone tribe also rebelled and the Extet Empire started an invasion. The north was in a state of emergency. There was also a naval blockade and the supplies from the south was cut off. The rebels even surrounded the Eternal Star City for some time. The nobles in the city even united to force the king to abdicate. Everything happened very suddenly. Bad news was reported in the court every day, such as the fall of a territory, the invasion of an enemy, the defeat of the army, allies breaking treaties, a noble was killed or there was a brutal massacre. Everyone is alarmed and prayed for a better tomorrow but received worse news the next day. The people in the city were in rags as they struggled to survive under the pressure of the army. Those not in the army were hardly able to get any food. Nobles below the rank of earl were like beggars. Their previous power was as good as done. Those that had gold were also unable to trade for food. Thieves, robbers, and mobs emerged endlessly. Even the army could not suppress them. The number of people in the army that died from battle, illness, or starvation also increased as the day goes by. It was to the extent that the city moat was blocked with the pileup of corpses. The people outside the kingdom had it worse. Many are reduced to refugees or mobs. They drifted with the wind and have nothing to rely on. Robbers roamed and other criminals run rampant. Many lords were hanged in their own fields. Some officials were even flayed in the kingdom offices. It was impossible to make a living without weapons. I heard from a messenger rider that piles of bodies lay every few steps of the road in the wild. It was impossible for a horse to gallop for half a minute. If there were less than 5 knights, refugees and mobs would swarm to attack. It was a tough year. Gilbert looked out the window. His tone was calm, but Thales could hear the desolation and resentment in his voice. The misfortune of the Jade Star royal family is amongst the biggest footnotes. Thales did not speak. Gilbert sighed and continued. The king touched his white hair, worrying about the city every day. The lights from the candles in the conference room were never put out. Everyone from the Jadestar family, such as the princes, the king's brothers, and others were assigned tasks like supervising the post-war work, winning over the nobles, or even fight at the front lines. That was until they were all mercilessly slaughtered. His Majesty, the former sovereign, was beheaded at the throne. The princesses were strangled in their sleep. The prince's concubines were burned to death in the castle, his descendants were killed by swaddling clothes. Even Her Highness the previous empress was. The heroic eldest prince took his sword and did not retreat. He died together with his protector in front of the palace. The younger prince, Prince John, was the most unfortunate. Just as he was about to obtain victory in the southwest battlefield, he was killed by a shameful sneak attack from behind. One of the princes in the front lines was shoved down from the highest room in the castle. Another was killed by poison during a noble's treaty banquet. One was forced into a tight siege by Exdet and had no support for 3 full hours. The whole army was annihilated and he perished in battle. It was to the extent that when His Majesty Kessel was hurrying somewhere in the wilds, he was accosted by 500 professional soldiers. At that time only Yodel was with him. Deaths and bloodshed covered the entire country. The upper levels were the court, the nobles, and the influential families. At the bottom were the knights, the businessmen, the laymen. They suffered heavy casualties. This was the most difficult page in the history of the constellation. Thales took a deep breath. This country had experienced such a terrifying unrest before I transmigrated? Gilbert calmed down and spoke solemnly. This is why, please personally pursue the answer to the bloody year in the future. At the same time, please prepare yourself. The bloody year is only the tip of the iceberg. There was never any lack of bloodshed in the history of Constellation. Thales nodded. He suppressed his curiosity and excitement, and doubts about the bloody year were attached with a number and filed into memory. Gilbert looked at Thales' cautious expression and lightly nodded. He then turned around and continued speaking. Thales. The search for matters related to your bloodline started then. Your father, His Majesty Kessel, may have survived, but he had lost all of his relatives during that year. He also lost a pair of children, that is your older brother and older sister. Among them, the 1-year-old Luther Jadestar was swaddled to death. The assassin was spotted and in the chaos, he abducted the 4-year-old Lydia Jadestar. Here, Gilbert glanced at Thales with a complicated expression. Thales. Child. The middle-aged man slowly said, at the beginning, that lamp was not used to find you. Thales lowered his head, looking at the wound on his hand. So, it was like this. After the coronation of His Majesty, Lycia from the Sunset Temple personally performed a divine art that could find any living creature in the world that had His Majesty's bloodline. However, when we found Princess Lydia. In short, His Majesty and the Jadestar family had lost all of the legitimate successors, and the situation stayed that way for 12 years. During this period, no new bloodline was born to His Majesty. In the past 12 years, Constellation only had a supreme king. There were no princes or princesses. Even political marriages were chosen from the children of the 6 most influential families. This was until one day when that bloodline lamp lit up again. The study room was silent for a long time. Thales recalled the scene from the previous night. He needed to confirm one thing. During His Majesty's 5th or 6th year of administration. So, when Gilbert continued, Thales did not hesitate to interrupt the middle-aged noble. The plan to obliterate the royal family, Thales said softly. Who was the most likely assailant? Gilbert closed his eyes for a moment. He then said, it is the Charlton family and the Shadow Shield. Thales silently sighed in his heart. One is a 1,000-year-old inherited assassin family of the night. The other is an assassin organization that had rampaged in the darkness for a few hundred years. Together with some hidden hands, they plotted what is known as the Starfall Rebellion Plan. This was something the secret department of the kingdom later found out. 2 secret protectors of the former sovereign, 80 II, were diverted by someone. As a result of the former sovereign's benevolence, the elite royal guards was dispatched along with the eldest prince to suppress the mob that had suddenly gathered in front of the palace. Although the 40 guards from the city defense team were elites ranging from ordinary class to super-class masters, and there were enough to line up from the front of the gate to the palace at the back, the legendary assassin managed to kill them all along the way. They could not even hold him off for half a minute. That was how Lord Charlton cut off the previous king's head. That's right, Thales silently thought. I have personally seen with my own eyes that knife skill that relentlessly presses forward and is unstoppable. Several of His Highness' elder brothers, including His Highness the eldest prince, were assassinated by the Shadow Shield using a different strategy. His Majesty's had a pair of children remaining in the court. They, together with the prince's concubine and the eldest princess, were killed by Bonnet Charlton. Bonnet. This name is really familiar. Thales huffed. This was the man Jayla referred to as a stranger. He resisted the urge to feel JC's dagger. He also resisted the urge to immediately go back to the room and inquire from Yodel. Please continue. Thales immediately changed his mood and nodded his head. Please talk about my part. Gilbert spruced up his clothes because of excitement and also because his necktie was mispositioned. He then continued. I know a little bit about your biological mother. According to the words of your father, His Majesty Kessel, her name should be Thuringirana. As for her family name, His Majesty never talked about her background. She is probably not a noble. From this name, I even suspect that she is a foreigner. But that is all. Nothing more. He did not tell me her age, when she met His Majesty, or even whether she is still alive. Thales frowned. I was sent to the Brotherhood at least 7 years ago. Thales lowered his head and muttered. That means, in the year 665, my mother met the king. Could you? However, at that moment, Gilbert shook his head. All this while, His Majesty has had many lovers, whether open or hidden. Some stayed with him for a month or two, some remained for as long as 10 years. For more definite information on their situation, only Yodel, who always followed His Majesty around, would know. However, all of them had nothing? Thales asked in suspicion. Only my mother, whom I had not seen, gave birth to me all of a sudden? And then the lamp lit up when my blood touched the floor? Isn't this too suspicious? My father, His Majesty the King, is also neither cold nor warm to his illegitimate child. He also does not seem to want to discuss with me about my mother. Are you sure I am their child? Gilbert frowned. I am unable to and also cannot comment on His Majesty's actions. As for your mother, I can only say it is fate. The middle-aged man then looked uncomfortable as he added. Besides that, I have to warn you that those ideas just now are not favorable to your future identity. I would remind you to not mention it again. Gilbert's gaze was so harsh that Thales, who was sitting on a leather chair, shrank back. After all, the bloodline lamp from the divine powers of the sunset goddess is never wrong. His Majesty also insisted that lady there in Girana is your biological mother. So, keep this in mind and bury it in your heart. Maybe one day, His Majesty would answer this question for you. The frosty expression and unassailable majesty of Kessel V flashed in his mind. Thales turned to another direction and rolled his eyes. This above answers the questions about where you came from and who you are. Gilbert's face was solemn. So, about where you are going. At this moment, a person had suddenly appeared in the study. He had silently fallen in right in front of them. Gilbert's expression changed quickly. He instantly got up and used his foot to kick up a staff from the side. When the middle-aged noble caught the staff with his hands, he had steadfastly stopped right in front of Thales. Thales then realized that the seemingly gentle and elegant middle-aged noble had quite good martial skills. However, the middle-aged noble soon gave a sigh of relief and relaxed again together with Thales. This was because the person that suddenly appeared was covered in a black hooded leotard and wore a dark purple mask. Hide. The Supreme King, His Majesty's protector, Yodel Kato, said briefly in a hoarse voice. Some people are approaching here at high speed. 20. At this moment, Thales recalled Gilbert's words. There is no lack of bloodshed in the history of Constellation. Chapter 22, Secret Chamber Debriefing. Bad luck strikes again so quickly after finally being able to get a good sleep? This thought crossed Thales' mind as he watched Gilbert calmly summon a few of the nearby swordsmen of eradication. Yodel patted Thales' shoulder and shook his head. The expression behind his mask was not visible, but Thales gave the silent protector a smiley in his mind. The several swordsmen of eradication efficiently accepted their orders one by one. The originally empty and quiet Mindy's hall suddenly became lively. 50 guards were dispatched under a unified command, moving methodically, sounds of commands and reports following one after another. Team 3 is going to the main entrance on the second and third floor. The deployment of troops is complete on both sides of the big hall. Minor reinforcement on the roof of the hall is in place. Finally, Gilbert calmly gave a few more words to a swordsman of eradication that looked like the leader of the group. He then turned back to the study and carried Thales, who was peeping from the entrance of the study, back in. As always, Yodel had already disappeared into thin air. The middle-aged noble skillfully used his staff to pry open a plank behind the bookshelf. He then pulled back the bookshelf, revealing a secret chamber inside. Who is coming? Are they friends or foes? Thales struggled to ask as Gilbert carried him in. Gilbert lit up the everlasting lamp in the secret chamber and closed the door before asking in reply, I suppose you wanted to ask who would choose to break into a well-guarded estate of the royal family without warning at 5 in the evening? Gilbert had obviously no longer considered the young master an ordinary child. Thales gave a mocking smile. He already knew the answer to the question. Sorry. I would need to inconvenience you and have you wait here for a moment. Secrecy is of the utmost priority. Gilbert carefully drew open a curtain in the dim light, revealing a fairly large iron plate with 6 different kinds of filter holes in it. Thales curiously approached and saw 6 different places in the holes. The first floor of the Mindy's hall, the garden, the balcony on the second floor, the corridor at the second floor, the stairs at the third floor and also the patio at the third floor along with the outdoor roof of the hall could be seen. This is a surveillance mirror that uses mirror reflections to see all the critical areas in Mindy's hall. Gilbert smiled. Isn't this a periscope? Thales exclaimed to himself quietly. It is time for the first group to fight. The other guys are scattered. Yodel's voice came from the void. Thales immediately stood in front of one of the surveillance mirrors. This was at the garden on the first floor. There was a group of 10 swordsmen of eradication from the Jadestar family. They had set up a formation on tacit understanding, swords and shields simultaneously attacking 5 differently dressed but completely covered intruders. However, the intruders also seemed to be a team that was well-coordinated team. 2 of them nimbly held their scimitars, moving among the swords and shields, looking for an opportunity and to rescue a companion that fell into perilous situation. One used an arm shield and a flail. He kept striking out through the dense sword and shield formation, causing one of the guards to back away again and again. Another one used a half-sword and leaned forward to attempt to break through any opening in the formation. The last one also held a sword and shield. He seemed to be looking for an opening while leading the attack. Hired mercenaries and adventurers. Gilbert took a glance at the periscope and said, it appears to be a team that had cooperated and worked together for a long time. They lived on wars or a lord's pay, working as hunters, soldiers, scouts, bodyguards or even assassins. There is nothing they would not do. I only arrived at Mindy's Hall last night and there are already visitors? Thales could not help but spat out. Is the royal family's majesty so cheap? Mr. Thales. I can assure you that the majesty of the royal family is by no means cheap. It is the exact opposite. This is what is strange about the royal family and is what made our enemies uneasy and afraid, Gilbert had lightly replied without sounding nervous or solemn. It was as though this was just a game. Enemies? Thales turned his head and looked lost in thought. Yes. Do not worry about what is happening outside. The well-trained guards in Yodel would deal with everything. Now is also the best time to explain to you the third issue. Our enemies and our allies. The middle-aged noble took a few steps back. He sat down on a dark-colored sofa in the secret chamber. He then smiled and said, "Right now, your existence is our greatest secret that we want to keep from the people, especially to the nobles and lords of Constellation. The 6 big clans guarding the kingdom's territory and the 13 distinguished families supporting the kingdom are core members of Constellation's higher parliament. Despite constant elimination and replacement, it is contradictory. After all, they represent the ranking and influential nobles who, at the time of establishing the kingdom, vowed to govern Constellation together with the royal family. So, on the surface, this is a country where the king and the nobles rule together." Thales took note of this in his heart. He needed more information. Were the nobles conferred territories in the kingdom? Do they have full control of their own respective territories? Gilbert nodded. That is the initial source of power for the nobles since the time of the ancient empire until now. It then developed into Constellation. Although many nobles had only their names and honor left, the ones that really hold the lifeline of the country are the 6 big clans and the 13 distinguished families that still control large territories. In accordance to their vows in the imperial order, they were ordered to defend the territory from all sides, pledge allegiance to the king and also pay taxes. The only territory the royal family could directly control is the Jadestar family's central territory. A country that is not at all inferior to the Middle Ages. Its productive forces are not acceptable compared to the country I saw. At this very moment, Yodel's voice resounded in their ears again. An intruder is at the roof of the hall. He is currently being blocked by a guard. Looking at the calm and collected Gilbert, Thales held back the desire to look at the scene in the surveillance mirror. These suzerains may have their own legal private armies, but, most of the time, they would choose to hire outsiders to do odd jobs, especially some jobs that require staying clear of incrimination. This is especially true for the more powerful and dominant lords, such as our guests outside. Gilbert curved the corners of his mouth. Then what is the significance of higher parliament formed by the nobles and suzerain, and their authority? Thales asked in a susceptible voice. The higher parliament is the product of the virtuous monarch Mindes III during his rule. After paying a heavy price during the Fourth Peninsular War, the virtuous monarch ordered those with influence such as the suzerains and nobles, the officials, the sacrifice priest, the traders and scholars to form the higher parliament and the Council of National Affairs. The former was a place to discuss official business exclusively for nobles. The latter was for the wealthy and influential in Constellation. With Mindes III's superb mediating skills, he had eliminated numerous conflicts and obstacles, assigned taxes, allocating resources, borrowing and repaying loans, allowing Constellation to proudly retain its precious resources from the war that devastated both countries. A leader that utilized the kingdom's powers to deal with conflict and reach a compromise, crafting a platform for a consensus of the hierarchy. Thales committed this to memory. Ignoring the Council of National Affairs for now. The higher parliament of Constellation had been preserved after the virtuous king rule. Constellation's national affairs such as the king's orders and decrees are announced after a consensus had been reached by the nobles and the supreme king. This gave rise to certain accepted conventions. In fact, after the formation of the higher parliament, the disagreements the king had, nobles infighting, pretentious obeisance had all reduced, Gilbert calmly said. The prototype of the representative system? No. It is impossible for it to be such an advanced thing. It is a bit like a hierarchical nation turning into a nation with absolutism. Feudal lords make up the structure of the system, but it is moving towards a situation where local influence compete against central authority. However, with the arrival of the Bloody Year, the conflicts between the 6 big clans and the 13 distinguished families became more apparent. For 13 days after former sovereign King 82 was murdered, the Constellation capital under the jurisdiction of Constellation closed its gates and restrained its troops, until Kessel returned. They then reached an agreement and coronated the new king. An independent feudalistic parliament, the feudal lords uniting into an organization voicing against the monarch. These are all bad news for me. Thales thought apprehensively. The parliamentary process can actually eliminate the royal family's role. This is a frightening power. When the time is right, it could become the storm that would overthrow the royal family. But King Kessel did not have any heir in the past 12 years, the 6 big clans have already observed that. Gilbert had a vigilant expression as he replied in a mysterious and complicated way. Forgive me for speaking bluntly. Our powerful neighbor in the north, which is the Hero Raikuru in the Hero Chara's nation, Extet Kingdom, which is also known as Western Peninsula's Blade, adopts a system where the suzerains elect a king. The king is selected from among the qualified suzerains. As he spoke, Yodel's hoarse voice appeared again. The enemy is attacking on the 2nd floor. Team 3 and Team 4 are dealing with it. There are also 5 more approaching the 3rd floor. This time, Thales did not make any action. Gilbert took a deep breath. He then pointed outside. Mr. Thales. Right now, do you know where your enemies are? Thales remained silent. The constellation's hereditary monarchy. A foreign country's elected monarchy. The 6 big clans and the 13 distinguished families. Enemies. Gilbert had pretty much given Thales the answer. However, Thales thought that the information was not sufficient. All kinds of possible conjectures flashed through his mind. With his brain working quickly, he extracted valid elements as he continued to ask. If the king's bloodlines were cut off, the ones guarding the borders, the 6 big clans, would naturally be the first choices to inherit the crown. But does this also mean that the new king would inherit Jadestar's territory, assets, vassals, and influence? If the 6 big clans were originally on equal footing, what would happen to Constellation when one suddenly becomes the royal family, expands rapidly and has orthodox supreme authority? The 6 big clans would become 5 big clans and one large beast. Would it be the same as during the rule of the previous royal family where everyone lives happily and peacefully together working towards a better tomorrow? Gilbert had been accustomed to being interrupted casually by the young master's words. However, this time the middle-aged noble quietly looked at him with a solemn expression. Thales also looked back, his heart feeling heavier. Thales' eyes glinted in their joint efforts to secure the crown. They, the 6 big clans and 13 distinguished families, also probably experienced a complicated and headache-inducing bargaining and splitting of the spoils. At the very least, they would need to discuss about who gets the crown. In particular, after 12 years without an heir, most people would think that the end of the Jadestar bloodline is inevitable. Thales deeply exhaled. Looks like my survival would really affect the peace and unrest of this country. Suddenly, a thought flashed through his mind. Thales was stunned for a moment. Gilbert. The boy stood up from the couch and frowned. He then slowly asked, during the bloody year, what roles did the suzerains play? I seemingly heard you say something about forced abdication? Then the disaster of the royal family. Gilbert breathed in deeply but had a complicated expression. Thales felt a chill in his heart. His Majesty was beheaded at the throne. The princesses were strangled in their sleep. The concubine was burned to death in the castle. The prince's descendants were swaddled to death. The eldest prince fought at the palace entrance and died. The king's younger brother met with a surprise attack on the battlefield and perished. Then there were 4 more princes. Thales' mouth hung open as he dumbfoundedly fell back onto the sofa. This was the first time he felt that life was so complicated after transmigrating. This guy was never discouraged even during the most difficult days in the Brotherhood. There was silence in the secret chamber for a long time. This was until Yodel's voice again sent a warning. This seems to be the last elite group. They are now fighting on the 3rd floor. However, Thales no longer cared. His mind drifted towards the possible employer of the intruders. Why was there such a useless royal family? Such that they were massacred by the suzerains under them? In that case, escaping from the Brotherhood would be suicide. My so-called father can still sit and relax on the throne safely wearing his crown? Who or what gave him such confidence? Is it a mystic? Wait. Is my supposed father still the king now? Why could he still stay as king until now? This clearly means. No. Thales sat up immediately at the next moment. His look solemn, but he firmly rejected his own guess. First of all, the bloody year disaster starts from top to bottom, outside to inside. Assassinating a widely accepted and wise king does not help the conflict between the nobles. Second, Gilbert. You said before that the higher parliament held power independently for 13 days after the assassination of the king. They had no king for 13 days. Was it because they could not evenly divide the spoils or reach a unified decision that they then established a new king? Or was it because they were terrified? They were even unprepared to deal with the previous king's death. The key point is that my father, His Majesty Kessel, was crowned after an agreement had been reached by the High Parliament. This shows that he has enough support from the big clans. Could it be that someone foresaw that Prince Kessel, who was in his prime of life, would not have an heir for 12 years so that the suzerains needed to wait for 12 years to take the crown? What kind of psionic ability would guarantee this? Finally, the last doubtful point. You said that my father had already taken revenge on all those that he could. The hidden dangers were basically resolved. The rest that he did not take revenge on, he could not, or it was impossible to do so. Perhaps the 6 big clans were indeed horrible. But if they were really behind the killings of the royal family, then His Majesty, the Iron Hand Kessel, would have taken action in the past 12 years? And by nature, the royal family and the 6 big clans were alike. They were simply powerful nobles with a long history. If they were really prepared to take the throne, they would know they could not, at least they cannot scheme together and start this precedent. The best of the clans massacring the royal family. What if one day they themselves rule the throne? How would they know history does not repeat itself? The 6 big clans were not the ones that murdered the royal family. Am I right, Gilbert? Thales stubbornly stared at the middle-aged noble as though trying to dig something out of his head. He saw Gilbert step forward and give a lamenting smile. Gilbert cleared his throat and nodded. Originally, my intention was to guide your train of thought to act as the enemy to the 6 big clans, and that would be enough. However, it seems that I still underestimated you, my dear little sir. I believe His Majesty would be proud that you could think of this. However, the suzerains that were at the palace were not completely guiltless. At the very least, during the slaughter of the royal family, they chose to sit aside and even happily watched it happen. Gilbert's eyes looked sad. He hesitated for a while and then finally said, "There is definitely someone else behind the disaster of the Jadestar royal family, but I myself am not clear about the real truth. Only His Majesty knows all the details. This is the tragedy of the Jadestar family. It would be up to His Majesty to personally tell you about it." Thales fixedly looked at Gilbert, but then he huffed vigorously. It was as though a huge balloon was suddenly deflated. He threw himself onto the sofa behind him. Sheesh. Thales could not be bothered with his etiquette as he rolled his eyes. "Just say it earlier." Gilbert laughed. He then bowed slightly. He tacitly approved the young master's words and thought to himself, "Thales. This boy, perhaps Constellation, may be different because of him. Although the Jadestar royal family's real enemy is not yet known, you are probably more terrifying than the so-called 6 big clans and 13 distinguished families, but that is also unknown to them at the same time." Suddenly, a voice interrupted them. "Everything is settled." Yodel's voice came again. "There are no survivors." Gilbert's expression looked serious. He nodded and slowly stood up. "Very good." Thales did not react and just stared. "Everything is already over in the time needed to cook a meal?" The stone had just fallen, but there wasn't even any noise? Gilbert stood beside the door of the secret chamber and gestured towards Thales, asking him to get out of the secret chamber. He said, "Do not worry, Mr. Thales. They simply came to probe. These chores are better off being attended to by us. Your battlefield is 100 times more perilous and vicious." Chapter 23, Mortal Creatures. In the afternoon of the 16th of November at the Red Street Market. The normally bustling and lively red light streets were filled with the star blue uniforms of the lightly armored police. The dark blue uniformed police personnel were at the wrecked buildings and by the road. They were coming and going, armed with stretchers, supplies, and their notebooks. "There is another one here." A police officer waved his hand, telling another inquiring colleague who had just arrived. He dragged out a deformed body from a collapsed beam. "This one is still breathing." Another urgent cry came from a distance. The doctors and healers employed by the town hall, including some temple priest volunteers, hurried on ahead. Lorbek Dara, the Class 1 chief of the Western City Police Station, stood on a small hill of collapsed buildings. His feet stepped on the blood-stained building materials. He had just sent away with a smile a few government officials from the town hall who were neatly and brightly dressed like those guys in a backstage. He had politely and even modestly listened to their stupid complaints about how everything here was the police's responsibility and that the town hall is too busy serving the people to waste resources here. Behind Lorbek was a large umbrella installed in an open space. This was a temporary morgue. At that moment, there were nearly 100 corpses. Some of them were innocent civilians while some belonged to the underworld. There were many officials wearing masks and walking around the corpses with pencils and papers. From time to time, a family member that had been searching for a long time, or had hurried here upon receiving the news, would recognize a corpse and give a heartbreaking cry. Some of the family members, recognizing the uniform of the officials, would furiously rush over but were pulled away by the police and the soldiers who had been prepared for it. Lorbek lowered his head and gave a deep sigh. Fortunately, it was winter and the flies have not yet gathered. Lorbek trampled on a signboard that had broken into several pieces. When he saw that this was a chess club building, his expression turned stiff and he walked in. An exquisite swordsman piece fell out from the bloodstained ruins. Lorbek stopped and bent down slowly to pick up the piece before dusting away at it. However, the blood on the piece had already clotted and could not be wiped away. These bastards. Lorbek's face was pale as he looked at the piece. The swordsman piece was coincidentally missing its sword arm. It was as though it broke from the sudden force. The chief turned to look at the side of the ruins. A man in a dark red coat was also looking at everything. The man in red coat turned around and saw the dissatisfaction on the police's face. "I will not approve," Lorbek said resolutely. "Are you sure?" The man in red coat showed his face. His bony face was covered with a beard. His tone was filled with ill intentions. "But this is requested by His Excellency and the Blood Bottle Gang. Nicholas. This is not what we originally agreed on. Even His Excellency would not agree to you bombing Red Street Market into ruins and causing the loss of almost 200 lives." The police gritted his teeth to resist his anger as he spat out his words one at a time. "And then you even want their bodies?" Lorbek felt as though his discontent was about to break through the sky. However, the man named Nicholas replied with a cold face, as though he did not care. "That is not correct. Aren't the destroyed buildings all only near the center? I also never knew that the chief of Western City Police Station that had distanced himself while observing all evening also possessed a sense of justice and compassion. Besides that, didn't we also lose quite a lot of people? Scum. You gangs fight your wars and you expect me to send my men to help you?" Lorbek thought angrily. "These are the losses of the Blood Bottle Gang. It is also His Excellency's losses." "Naturally, it also means your losses," Nicholas said. "This scum. Why did the Western Front banish him? They should have just cut off his head." Lorbek cursed in his heart. Nicholas then said in a bad tone, "So, this is for the benefit of His Excellency. It's just a few bodies, I am sure you would allow it?" However, Lorbek did not give in to his persuasions. He marched towards Nicholas and quickly arrived right at Nicholas's nose. Lorbeck's eyes were full of anger. I do not care how many of your Blood Bottle gang members have died. I can accept His Excellency's orders, but he did not mention that you would cause such a huge mess. This morning, everyone in the kingdom has learned that you all played with explosives at Red Street. We even had meetings discussing the gang fights at the Western District. Nicholas's expression changed. He stepped forward, leaned towards Lorbeck's forehead without flinching and stared at the chief's eyes. With hate and fury, he said, then you must know that our anger is no less than yours. The Blood Bottle gang would not be resigned to circumstances. We repay our blood debts. Lorbeck, who was provoked by Nicholas, also responded angrily. Stop talking about your trivial matters, especially your gang of useless losers. He then shouted, the Blood Bottle gang would not resign to circumstances? Do you believe that if I remove the police and the patrol teams, you scums would not even be able to leave the Red Street Market? Nicholas frowned indignantly. The anger in his eyes became more and more vigorous. Lorbeck glared back at him without backing off. The surrounding patrolling members noticed what was going on and quietly approached. Two swordsmen of termination captains had a cold expression as they held the hilt of the sword on their waists. Nicholas saw these soldiers from the corner of his eyes and his heart turned cold. This cop really has guts. At the same time, he noticed a few residents watching the excitement from the police cordon lines. A few of those who kept watch seemed to have ulterior motives. From time to time, they would disappear and then a few new guys would appear. Damn Brotherhood. The Red Street Market no longer belonged to the Blood Bottle gang. He considered the police's strength and the Brotherhood's menace. Nicholas suppressed the resentment in his heart and took a step back. The air mystic has disappeared. At the very least, we must admit defeat until the blood mystic returns. Damn the chief cop and damn the chief noble. I apologize for my statement, Lord Lorbeck Dara. Nicholas stressed the word Lord with a smile on his thin face. He then bowed down as though the anger before was artificial. This was not the standard bow. We really should not have bothered you. I will take my leave from this place and apologize to the Duke. Nicholas laughed, turned away, and left, until the expected response came from behind him. Wait. Lorbeck then clenched his fist tightly as he reminded himself that he should not have been impulsive. Shit. Damn. Sure enough, once I had stepped out, I could not turn back. Lorbeck waved his hand weakly, signaling for his men to step back. The corners of Nicholas's mouth curved upwards. He saw Lorbeck close his eyes agonizingly. After a while, Lorbeck whispered in a trembling voice. Shit. Fine. You can take the corpses but no more than 20. On top of that, they must be unclaimed. The smile on Nicholas's face finally looked genuine. This one will obey, my lord. He once again passionately addressed Lorbeck by his title. Unclaimed corpses? Nicholas laughed in disdain. Since the Blood Bottle gang wants these corpses, naturally they would be unclaimed corpses. Right? He was really happy with the police and community's cooperation. Nicholas bowed unconventionally and turned away. Lorbeck looked at the man's back and shook his head. He then asked weakly, why do you all want those bodies? It is for that important person to entertain a few old friends, Nicholas spoke in a frightened tone without turning his head. Be prepared for the banquet. When Nicholas disappeared, a few people that were observing also disappeared. Lorbeck looked at the pool of blood at his feet and saw his reflection. It was an image of a helpless middle-aged man with grizzled hair and wrinkles. Lorbeck felt disgusted in his heart. He took a deep breath and looked at the piece in his hand. He saw the one-armed swordsman smiling at him. The police chief sadly let go and turned away. The swordsman without a saber then fell into the bloody puddle, replacing Lorbeck's reflection. At 6 in the afternoon, at Mindy's Hall. For 5-man group with a clear-cut division of work, tacit cooperation, a superclass leading ordinary class elites, they were experienced and had extraordinary skill, but judging from their equipment and identity, they were hired men. Gilbert stood up from the side of a dead body. He waved his hand and had a guard carry the body down. Mercenaries and adventurers that dared to attack the royal family, if the employers don't have ample rewards promised to them, it would mean that they were confident that they could avoid the danger. The middle-aged noble stood on the first floor of the hall, his hands clasped at his back. He suppressed his disgust towards the collaborators. He faced an empty corner and asked, as a previous adventurer, what do you think? A hoarse voice came from the void, both, but it is mostly the latter. The employer did not tell them the truth, such as you would not encounter a superclass person or you would not encounter more than 20 guards. Maybe the employer never imagined that our guards would be extraordinary. On top of that, you were also there, the middle-aged noble replied. The corpses were then carried down from the stairs, the roof, and the corridor. Gilbert watched the guards carry away the invaders and clean up the bloodstains. He then lowered his head and was lost in thought. But this is still too simple, he muttered. Although we had doubled the guards at Mindy's Hall, even though they were all well-trained ordinary class and superclass swordsmen of termination, and even though they were simply hired hands to test things out, we had still managed this too easily and casually. The guards that carried the corpses ignored Gilbert, who was talking to himself. It looked as though Gilbert was talking to an empty space until Yodel appeared out of thin air beside him. They were not aware of death nor were they planning to kill the guards, the secret masked bodyguard whispered. If I had acted a little later, they would have probably retreated. Gilbert frowned deeply. This is not right. Even if they are here just to test things out, they were too hasty in their approach. It is almost as though they... Yodel continued, it was as though they wanted to die. The gray-haired middle-aged noble nodded. If their employers are really the people we suspect, then they must know that if we have an important secret this kind of deployment would be useless. So what are the reasons for their actions? Were they covering for someone else? Yodel shook his head and replied, no. I did not detect any other person. If there was nobody else. At this moment, Gilbert and Yodel both looked up and out of the door. In the sunset, a simple carriage was driven on the road towards Mindy's hall. Gilbert listened to the report of the guard and nodded. Jins has arrived. That woman. Gilbert frowned. She usually hates to sit in narrow places like carriages, but it looks like she endured her likes and dislikes to create a deception. After listening to those words, Yodel suddenly looked up. Gilbert felt strange. Initially, he wondered why the secret guard whose expression was not visible had so much of a reaction. However, immediately his face also turned pale and looked back at Yodel in shock. Deception. Could it be? Didn't you say that you did not detect any other person? Gilbert asked, looking pale. Yodel turned to look upstairs. His body flashed. I left 8 of the swordsmen of termination upstairs. However, before Gilbert could finish, Yodel had already disappeared. Wait. He did not detect any other person. Gilbert ferociously beat his head. Everyone. Gather at the 3rd floor fast. Protect your objective. Thales had cold sweat as he looked at the man in front of him. He was a pale-faced adult man wearing a gorgeous pleated sleeved jacket and branded leather boots. The man had suddenly appeared between him and the 8 swordsmen of termination. No wind, no sound, no chi, no trace. After that, out of the corner of his eyes, Thales saw the 8 swordsmen of termination spurting blood from their necks. When Thales turned his head, they had all already fallen to the ground. They simply twitched and groaned meaninglessly. Thales had met powerful enemies before, such as the mystic Asda. However, Thales had never encountered enemies that appeared so suddenly. Even with Thales' outstanding observation, he could not react in time. He completely did not see how the man moved. Thales subconsciously wanted to shout, but suddenly a right hand appeared in front. This well-dressed man suddenly covered his mouth. Thales still could not see the man's movements. Even when a master like Ralph, the phantom wind follower, moved swiftly, his shadows and the trajectories of his movement could still be seen. However, this was totally absent with the movement the man made with his right hand. It was like animated frames. Thales, who struggled fruitlessly, gave up wasting his energy. He calmed down, did his utmost to normalize his heartbeat, and looked at the man in front of him. The man, who was slightly taller than Yodel, had tidy blonde hair, and behind it, his blue pupils were clear. Although his face was morbidly pale, he was, Thales could only say it this way, very handsome. Compared to Asda's gentle charm, this man had a more bright and easygoing type of face. Along with his simple but elegant taste of clothes, he would definitely attract girls when he goes out. Unfortunately, Thales could not feel any warmth from his body. A sweet-smelling perfume wafted from his body. Even a country bumpkin like Thales could recognize that this was not the cheap perfume used by the citizens at the bazaar. Right now, the handsome man gave him a pale smile. It was just a simple workout for me, but look at what I found. A mortal creature. A mortal creature? Thales took note of this special term. The smell on your body, slurp, really delicious. Sure enough, food can be found at unexpected places. However, at the next moment, the easygoing blond man's expression suddenly changed. He held Thales' hand and glimmered again. The next moment, Thales was held in the man's arms with his mouth covered. He realized so quickly. That masked guy. I cannot deal with him. The handsome blond man muttered, I might as well take this home to eat. Fortunately, the sun is setting. That was the last thing Thales heard. The next moment, his eyes were surrounded by a boiling hot and blood-red package. He felt the sky spin. The scene at Mindy's hall seemed to spin and getting smaller. Before his consciousness vanished, he vaguely saw Yodel's mask appearing amidst the 8 fallen swordsmen of termination. Chapter 24, Immortal Species, 1. Lorbeck cautiously sat on a club visitor's chair. He looked reserved instead of having the conduct and dignity of a Class 1 police chief. At the corner of his eyes, he could see the tricolor iris flower symbol on the study and the portrait of an amiable old man. Lorbeck knew that even if he had the city under control and was the suzerain who had the real power over the city, he could not comfortably sit there and talk to the extremely graceful but threatening young noble opposite him. On top of that, the man was only a small police chief. Thank you for meeting me despite your busy schedule, Lorbeck said as he bowed respectfully. Please do not say that. According to your experience and status, you are more than qualified to be my teacher. These were my late father's words. The young man had curly iron-colored hair, round face and thick lips. The man had a friendly smile. He jokingly said, although my father and I are different when it comes to the taste of wine, both of us agree when it concerns getting your respect. Lorbeck promptly nodded, feeling warm in his heart. The late Duke is a virtuous person and also magnanimous and benevolent. On this point, you are not inferior in any respect. After these words, the young man looked at the portrait in the study. The late Duke's smile was kind and amiable. After a few seconds, the young man recovered from his thoughts. I am sorry. It has been 2 years, but I hope I have not disgraced him. The young man shook his head with a wry smile. He then stood up, looked faintly at the distance with a fleeting sad smile and sighed leisurely. I sometimes think. If my father was still here, I would rather listen to him scold me. Lorbeck felt somewhat awkward. On one hand, he also missed the late kind-hearted Duke. On the other, he felt that the young Duke showing his true feelings this way was a very private thing and that he himself must not interrupt indiscriminately. Fortunately, the young Duke promptly turned around. He shelved his memories and joked to relieve the awkwardness. Well, as long as he does not raise the subject of wine. Listening to this remark, Lorbeck and the young man laughed silently. It was common knowledge that the late Duke loved to drink extant rye wine while the young Duke preferred the exquisite wine from Saraducci Fine Grape Brew. Because of this, both of them argued on more than one occasion in front of the tricolor iris flowers family emblem. It got to the point where they almost pulled out their swords to duel. Only the late Duchess and the lovely Miss Hill could, with a murderous glare or a coquettish look, get them both to stop at the table. With just a few words from the young man, the awkwardness and embarrassment in the house vanished. While laughing, the young man put down an agarwood wooden pipe in his hand. He then walked to the bar and picked up a bottle of unlabeled wine. I am sorry. I do not actually smoke. However, just now I went to the horse market. I talked to the elderly there for a bit, the young man explained with a wry smile. So, I hoped that holding a pipe would make me look a bit older. They would rather pay attention to a horse that lost a hoof as opposed to a young man selling his ideas to suppress bandits. The sharp-eyed Lorbeck noticed that among the various bottles of grape wine on the bar was a conspicuously placed bottle of strong black rye wine. Although it was never opened, it was kept spotlessly clean. Lorbeck could not help but feel touched by the thought of the late Duke. It had been 2 years since the death of the late Duke Covendier. This was the first time Lorbeck had met the new Duke privately. However, in a matter of minutes, the police chief was already impressed by the amiable and approachable young Duke. He was worthy of being passed down as one of the 6 big clans. He deserved the rather die for friends than foes tricolor iris. He was truly the son of the late Duke. It seems the Covendiers have a successor. The police chief bowed a little and then confirmed the young man's opinion. Only those that lack talent would rely on seniority to speak. I believe that your excellency's character and abilities would be enough for this. I cannot thank you enough. The young Duke forced a smile and brought 2 glasses of wine. He offered Lorbeck a glass. These words coming from the mouth of the youngest chief of the police department. They really make me feel at ease. Did you know how Duke Cullen encouraged me? Lorbeck happily took the red wine. His restraint had vanished at some point in time. He found it ridiculous as he watched the young Duke imitate the posture and the manner of speaking of the pot-bellied East Coast Duke. Do not worry. Little Zayn. You know, both your father and I were raised by the former king with a liberal smacking of the buttocks. The young Duke's expression twisted as he imitated Duke Cullen. His face was red as he said in a thick voice, so if anyone questions our qualifications, we are going to show them our backsides. Lorbeck and the young Duke burst into laughter again and they knocked their glasses together and emptied their wine. A person with a high position but humble stance would always maximize goodwill from his subordinate. After the cordial and friendly exchange, they finally talked about the main topic. The young Duke finally frowned. I need a lot of bodies? Old friends? Banquet? The young Duke Covendier voiced his doubts. That person really said that? Lorbeck nodded solemnly. He said that he was following your order, but as far as I know. Even if I was crazy, I would not give such an order. Duke Covendier solemnly put the glass down and resolutely waved his hand. Lorbeck finally calmed down after seeing the young Duke's actions. I am new to government affairs. I also have not paid attention to the Blood Bottle Gang contact details. However, you have ample experience and are a police officer that knows about worldly affairs. What do you think of this? The young Duke raised his head and earnestly asked. The young Duke's humble and respectful attitude made Lorbeck feel comfortable. So, he wholeheartedly provided his opinion. As far as I know, there are not many situations that require the use of corpses. The mysterious mystics have died off long ago. The heretical god or demon sacrifices have not appeared for a long time. It is also not possible for the Blood Bottle Gang to expand to medical and therapeutic areas. So, what is left are races that live on dead bodies or blood. Lorbeck analyzed in detail. Zayn Covendier nodded slowly and closed his eyes as though he was thinking about something. After about a dozen seconds, he suddenly opened his eyes to stare at Lorbeck. He incredulously said, Immortal species? Lorbeck nodded in affirmation. The Duke gave a long sigh. The police chief no longer spoke. He knew that the next step was to wait for the promising young and high-ranked noble to give the final decision. Through bribery or persuasion, progressively and in an orderly manner, bring the underworld into the kingdom's structure and legal system. The young Duke's complexion looked bad. He put his hands behind his back and slowly strolled around the room. This reminded Lorbeck of the late Duke. This is the governing policy my great-grandfather was ordered to use during the reign of Kessel IV. The Blood Bottle Gang was a fruitful example for decades. However, it looks like they have now fallen into conflict. They cannot avoid revealing their lawless nature. The young Duke furrowed and cautiously chose his words. Although there is a rising gang that is pressing down on their territory, blindly permitting it is not a long-term solution. The use of Red Street Market to lay an ambush has endangered the lives and properties of the kingdom's residents. It even alarmed the Imperial Council and caused His Majesty to question furiously. It was extremely excessive and even overly atrocious. The young duke's face was solemn and majestic. His words were firm and cold. Each word sank into Lorbeck's heart, making him respect the other even more. On top of that, after losing the internal strife, he did not restrain his bad temper and licked his own wounds. Unexpectedly, he was like a cornered beast and wanted to use an outsider to help him prevail. He even used my name to threaten the police and demand for the corpses. Simply preposterous. Lorbeck lowered his head and waited for the final verdict of the tricolor iris flower. Ashford. The young duke shouted loudly, and a white-haired butler in formal wear answered as he came in. Lorbeck recognized the man and hurriedly greeted him. The man was the late duke's most trusted butler. The old butler meticulously greeted in return. He then respectfully listened to the commands of the young master. Who is the person maintaining contact with the Blood Bottle Gang? Forget it. No matter who it is, tell him to come to my study to explain himself. Send in a group of people bearing our tricolor iris flag. Go and get some answers from any Blood Bottle Gang member who has authority. They must give me an explanation for threatening my father's trusted lieutenant and a police officer of the kingdom. In addition, send another small squad with a superclass knight of eradication. Go and find their new guests and flush out those that desecrate corpses like vampires and werewolves. If you find any that violate the pact of humans and immortal species, you do not need to ask any more questions and immediately bring their heads to me. Never mind, that would be too messy, just give their heads to the dogs. Prepare the carriage and my clothes. I will move my trip to Renaissance Palace next week ahead of time. Sigh. These matters about gangs and the common people. I hope His Majesty would listen to me. Notify the kingdom's secret intelligence department, His Excellency Morat, that they should pay more attention to the grand banquet hall in Wild Vast Mountain. Immortal species enjoying corpses in the kingdom? Humph. When did they last gather at the kingdom? The bloody year? If I had found out that the vampires and werewolves interfered in our internal affairs again to subvert Constellation. When Lorbeck heard this, he knew he must not listen anymore. He quickly bowed. With the friendly and encouraging gaze from the duke, Lorbeck left the study. Behind him, the young duke was still unhappily exhorting the butler. The police chief stepped out of the main door of the Covendiers family estate and exhaled with relief. That evening, after the discussions with the duke, he knew he would not suffer any serious consequences due to disagreements with the Blood Bottle Gang. Most importantly, he had seen Zayn Covendier in person and sincerely felt that there is still hope in this deteriorating kingdom. After confirming that Lorbeck had left the estate, the butler Ashford quietly closed the door to the study. Duke Zayn closed his eyes. He took a deep breath and sat down on his chair. I really admire him. He is already 40 and yet he still has so much ardor. Zayn rubbed the bridge of his nose gracefully in relief. His face looked tired. It was as though he could change anything. It is a pity that taking care of the self-esteem of an official, especially one that has a high position, is compulsory. His late excellency thought highly of his talent. Besides that, he is likely worried about how the Blood Bottle Gang's discord would affect your perception, your excellency. Ashford quietly poured a glass of wine for his master. He then walked back to the wine counter and began to clean the many bottles, especially that bottle of rye wine. Speaking of the Blood Bottle Gang. Zayn lifted the glass, gently sipped, and enjoyed the sweet wine. He then shook his head and showed a helpless expression. They openly went to the police to request for corpses. I really do not know whether to laugh or cry. Mystics originate from magicians. I believe they would have the appropriate wisdom. Their leader, the air mystic, had disappeared after last night's battle, Ashford quietly reminded his master. On top of that, after the crushing defeat of the Blood Bottle Gang, their manpower became stretched thin. They presumably could no longer supply the Corleone family's blood food. This resulted in this stupid action. Ashford did not bother to glance at Zayn. Instead, he concentrated on wiping the bottle of rye wine that the old duke was never willing to drink. Losing a battle that is necessary to win must cost a lot. Zayn pondered as he shook his glass of wine lightly. However, I must make up for my own mistakes. The Extet's diplomatic group would arrive in the nation next month. The scheduled transfer of manpower from the Blood Bottle Gang may not be sufficient. Zayn looked down at his wine. He looked worried as he smelled its fragrance. He closed his eyes and exhaled deeply. He then slowly unbuttoned his collar and sipped his wine again. As the wine flowed into his throat, Zayn looked up at his father's portrait. The man's kind smile made him feel even more burdened. At least the Corleone family had quickly responded to your invitation. Letters have also been secretly sent out to the others. Based on their relationship with the tricolor iris flower, I believe there would be a reply soon, Ashford lightly replied. Poof. The Corleone family is simply the leader of the lower 7 pillars of the Night Kingdom, but barely 3 people and some blood slaves came. Zayn frowned and poured out the wine at the bottom of the glass. He closed his eyes and gently rubbed his temple. This is not their usual style. Ashford lowered his head, signaling that he was listening. A duke who has lots of descendants rich in blood, like the powerful Blood clan, ended up in the same situation as the beggars of the lower city district. The blood of the dead should have been enough, but they still impatiently wanted more and reached out to the living. On top of that, they even asked for ordinary class and superclass fighters. Zayn slowly opened his eyes. His eyes seemingly turned darker. He received more wine from Ashford as he faintly said, "What a pity." After all, you are the one that invited them here and provided them with food and lodging, Ashford silently said to remind his master. They hid the truth about the current situation of the Corleone family, Zayan said expressionlessly. He closed his eyes and exhaled to calm his mind. When he opened his eyes, his gaze was ice cold. Any accidents may destroy our plan. He then heavily said, let Seychelles and Cassine bring a group of 4 knights to the Vine Manor. First, discuss this with Nicholas. Pressure the Blood Bottle Gang. As long as they do not make trouble, the Iris would ensure their survival. Since they were already defeated, why do they want to make a fuss? After that, there is also the 3 vampires that came from the Eastern Peninsula. Zayan Covendir's tone was resolute and without doubt. His round face was calm yet terrifying for some reason. Find out the secret that they are hiding. If they do not cooperate, draft a formal letter to the Sunset Temple. The Covendir family has always been loyal to the Sunset Monarch. With this letter, attach 3 vampire skulls to say hello. Summon an interrogation for the East Continent's intelligence. I want to know all the recent events of the Night Kingdom. The 3 Blood Clan cannot be used anymore. Let us find someone else for this matter. Duke Zayan lightly put down the glass in his hand. King Kessel would be 48 the following year. All the kings chose their successors at this age. When Luo Ershing transmigrates 4 times at the starry sky. This is the crucial moment for the succession of the throne. But the contest with the other 5 powerful clans is the real crucial point. If Jadestar was destined to be without an offspring, then the equally remarkable descendant of Leinster Covendir, who had fought together from the start with King Tormund I, with his tricolor iris flag, would take the oath of king. That way, I would have enough authority to. Thinking of this, Zayan felt his shoulders turn heavier but stronger. He remembered about the fat Duke Cullen. Zayan's pupils moved slightly as he laughed. There were no traces of warmth in his eyes. Ashford put the bottle in his hands down, made a perfect bow and left. That's right. Although it is just a trifling matter, have Seychelles asked Nicholas. Zayan looked up. Duke Covendir of the tricolor iris eyes were abstruse as he asked, how is the probing of the Mindy's Hall? Chapter 25, Immortal Species, 2. Red. The color of blood. He shook his head feeling dizzy. Where am I? Sharp pain assaulted his chest and abdomen. He groaned in bewilderment. He opened his eyes in a daze only to see bloodiness in front of him. At this moment, a familiar and gentle voice said, Chirin. Do not move. Hold on a little more. The ambulance is coming. He was calm for a moment, but at the next moment, the pain in his chest and the dizziness in his head became more intense. Wu Chirin. The voice became more and more alarmed. You cannot die here. You, right. You still have not changed the world. How could you die here? You still have not changed the world. What qualification do you have to have a baby with me then? Change the world? Have a baby? He sobered up a little and breathed heavily. He felt much better. In a bloodied state he endured the acute pain and put on a forced smile. Is the second-year syndrome treatable? Ah. The familiar voice was seemingly crying tears of joy. However, the weeping laughter seemed to get softer and weaker like a candle about to die out. He suddenly panicked. No. It will not happen. He smiled painfully and wanted to call out to that voice. He wanted to joke around with her as usual. However, when he opened his mouth, he found that he could not call out her name. It was still red and bloody in front of him, but his whole body felt hotter. Poof. Thales fell into a thicket of grass. He opened his eyes and became fully aware. Damn it. What happened? By Thales' side was the pale-skinned blonde-haired man cursing angrily. How did it use up so much blood? His voice was filled with suspicion and dissatisfaction. Thales realized that the blonde-haired man turned into watery blood and took him flying at high speeds. Thales had another flashback. In that fragment of dreamland, it seemed he lost control again. This time the displacement is affected by the blonde-haired man through watery blood? Thales felt as though he had just got off a roller coaster, crashing on the ground and coughing dryly. Fortunately, I have experienced car sickness, man sickness with Yodel before this. Thales thought to himself as he shook his head, trying to get rid of the disturbing red blood color from his mind. It is obviously almost time to go. Could it be that the injury has not yet healed? The blood image dance is no longer proficient. The handsome blonde murmured and rudely grabbed Thales. It looks as though it is already dusk. Has the sun set behind the hill? It is also a bit cold. Are we outdoors? Thales could clearly see that they had fallen on a dusky trail by a thicket of grass. In front of him was an expansive manor with a large garden. A flag flapped at the iron gate located between the garden and the dusky trail. Weeds grew thick at the manor as though its owner never took care of it. If not for the fact that it was less refined, it could have been comparable to Mindy's Hall. That flag. Thales narrowed his eyes and saw 3 strange petals. It was red, blue and green in color. Thales recognized the flower. It was the favorite flower of Wu Chirin's first girlfriend. Is this an iris? Is this a noble's coat of arms? This is probably one of the enemies that Gilbert mentioned. What terrible luck. I fell right into an enemy's nest. Go quickly. Little whelp of the mortal species. The blonde impatiently pushed him towards the manor. Thales' thoughts furiously churned and reasoned. Looks like this handsome young man knows how to speak and is not just a brute that is difficult to tame. On top of that, he had also left behind other words such as how this was just an exercise and how it was fortunate that the sun was about to set. Thales thought it was fortunate that the guy seemed rational and then tried to find a countermeasure. The JC dagger was at his waist, but it was evident he could not hope to put this dagger to the man's neck or anything like that. He also could not suddenly injure himself to inform Gilbert and Yodel as it was too meticulous and obvious. He could only gather intelligence first. Hey! Thales turned around and shook off the blonde's hand. I see you have the demeanor and temperament of a noble. Your actions must match your appearance. Pay attention to your manners. The blonde-haired man was stopped by this remark. Manners? Demeanor? The man grinned and deliberately revealed his two ferocious fangs. I need to show manners to food fated to be eaten? The man purposely ground his sharp fangs. It is really similar to that creature from my memories. Thales leaned ahead and glanced at the two fangs. He contemptuously curled his lips and said, Your attitude towards food is terrible. You do not have the talent of a gourmet. The mental and physical conditions of the food could affect its quality. What are you going to do if your rudeness affects its taste? The handsome blonde was stunned for about 3 seconds and his malevolent expression had half relaxed. He then replied, Nonsense. Little whelp, you certainly have guts. The man then laughed and added, However, you are not the first food that was courageous. No need to try your luck. You cannot escape. So that my flesh and blood would become tastier? Thales showed an expression as if he finally understood. He then unexpectedly walked towards the manor. The man had gotten ready to carry him to the manor ahead when the man saw him walk to the front by himself. The blonde-haired man stretched his hand to scratch his head, puzzled at the food. He felt disdain in calling them prey, that did not seem to have any intention to escape. Halfway through the man felt that this was inappropriate and could only put down his hand. He then quickly kept up with Thales with a speed visible to humans. Not your flesh and blood. Just your blood. I believe you should have been injured recently? The smell of blood is drifting everywhere. Tisk. It is so fragrant I feel like having a mouthful first. The two continued to move forward. Then how do you prepare to eat me? Do you nibble or just suck the blood? From where do you start? Do you use seasonings? The Tuvalus like to eat their meat raw. They enjoy the howling of their prey. We generally suck the blood directly and it is divided into neck food and wrist food. As for seasonings, wait. Why am I talking about these to a short-lived whelp like you? The blonde stopped and looked at Thales, who evidently did not behave like a 7-year-old. I am destined to be food, right? Shouldn't it be a virtue to be polite to food that willingly gets sacrificed? Isn't that a virtue? Food that was in a good mental state may even taste better. You are weird as food. Do you think your actions would make me release you? It is hard to come by good food. Of course, it must be rare. Come. There is no need to stop. Let us continue walking. What is your name, sir? Young whelp? Why do you ask? Do you want revenge? The blonde stopped again. His suspicion and vigilance of the boy increasing. With your skill, it would not be easy to take revenge on you. Since I am already about to be eaten by you, you should at least tell me your name, right? Besides that, isn't shouting hey inconsiderately too boorish? You are not an illegitimate child without a surname, right? You should at least have a name. The blonde seemingly felt his pride stabbed by the last few words. He then proudly replied, My name is Istron van Lyka List Corleone from the Night Kingdom. The leader of 7 pillars, the Corleone family's first-class blood knight. Come. Come. Let us keep moving. So why do you call me immortal? What else could humans who have lifespans of less than 120 years old be other than mortals? Even young whelps like you would live another 90 years at most. Istron showed disdain. So you guys are immortals that have longer lifespans compared to us? Of course. A vampire's lifespan is endless, more than what the inferior mortals could imagine. Thales quietly filed away the information in his mind. Istron Corleone. Mortals. Immortals. Night Kingdom. Corleone family. The superior vampires. The most important point was that he did not seem interested as to why I appeared at Mindy's hall. This may be my only way out. Oh. I had forgotten that he wanted to eat me. Thales and Istron walked into the manor. The transmigrator's eyes narrowed. At the entrance, 2 fierce-looking men wearing red scarves headed towards them. The Blood Bottle Gang? Why are they here? Tell me. Why did we stop here? Is it better to simply fly in? If it was not because of the blood image dance, sigh. The handsome Istron suddenly realized that the mortal whelp could understand his words. So, he gracefully cleared his throat and indifferently continued. Poof. I would have flown in if this was my territory. However, we are only guests and need to maintain respect and courtesy towards the host. An immortal that pays attention to elegance. Thales thought to himself. The 2 helpers from the Blood Bottle Gang walked up. They looked at the 2 with bad expressions and said, Who is it? However, Istron furrowed his eyebrows. With a cool expression, he interrupted them with disdain. Get lost. Inferior mortals. Thales' expression twitched as he took back his earlier words. A few minutes ago. After the fiasco from the one-night war, one of the few Blood Bottle gang members who were in power rushed back to the capital. One full day after the battle, the head of the Psionic Warriors, Red Viper Nicholas, still looked hard-pressed. In the very least, together with the other 3 Psionic Warriors, he had to preserve the current status before the Blood Mystic, who had stayed hidden for a very long time, rushed back. First, he had to deal with the aftermath of the one-night war. Other than the explosion, there was also the issue of the Air Mystic disappearing without any trace. His personal bodyguard, that lunatic with the sword, was lying there with Ralph. Their upper bodies were almost cut open. One could only guess that Asda had also been killed. So, Nicholas had to make certain that the Brotherhood's 3 assassins, especially the Black Sword himself, was in the capital before he could leave in peace. In fact, Tinker, who had just come back from the Red Street Market, thought that he was oversensitive. Even if the Black Sword was at the capital, the man would not bother looking at him. Tinker and Numea were amongst the few 12 strongest of the Blood Bottle gang to return. Shit. So it was the cowards who would live to the end. Nicholas, they would not say what happened at the Red Street Market except that there was fear and panic. Nicholas had given up looking for the truth. As for revenge for the Air Mystic, he would discuss this with the Blood Mystic once that person returns. The Blood Bottle gang's morale took a huge blow after losing the highly profitable Red Street Market that they had occupied for a long time. Most of the common helpers had begun to waver. Their customers, regardless of whether they were nobles, merchants, or people from the same trade, expressed deep unswerving friendship to the Blood Bottle gang, but at the same time reduced all their dealings and withdraw their funds. Some even broke their contracts. Shit. Calm down. Stay calm. The debt of blood must be repaid. Nicholas. The Blood Bottle gang members whose morale had fallen at the other districts in the capital retreated when confronted with the irresistible inferior Brotherhood. It could be imagined that when the news spread nationwide, the fight at every branch would likely end up the same way. Second, the major supporter behind the Blood Bottle gang, the Covendier family with the crest of the tricolor iris, was indifferent even after finding out about their crushing defeat. He did not appease them, nor did he reinforce them. He also did not even spend a single copper to comfort them. What Nicholas resented the most was that they had previously done a lot of dirty work for them all over the kingdom. At this crucial moment, Seychelles, the Knight of Termination, did not even let him in through the front gate of the Duke's manor. That afternoon, he was even ordered to thoroughly investigate the theft at Mindy's Hall. Theft? Shit. Which part of me looks like a police investigator? Can I cut that part off? Thinking of police officers, Nicholas became even more furious. Damn. That cop of the West District. That Lorbeck or Lockerbie is usually smiling. I am not sure if he has dispatched people at the crucial moments of the one-night war to reinforce. Did we not agree to have police community cooperation? Forget it. Nicholas suppressed his unhappiness. Lorbeck had used all sorts of excuses when he wanted a few corpses. The funny part was that he acted like a righteous envoy. After receiving so many inducements, you act like a righteous envoy? What are you doing talking about righteousness in front of me, Nicholas? Which part of me looks like a good person? Can I cut that part off? Damn. In the old times, I would have gone to his house, strip his wife naked and hang her at the doorbell of the Western City Gate. Besides that, Nicholas wanted to settle a matter involving Covendier's 3 vampires. The vampires were unexpectedly sent to the Blood Bottle gang's branch in the Eastern City District. The Vine Manor was actually also Covendier's property. Take good care of them? Did you think we are entertaining lost puppies? They want the blood of 10 people every day. They even asked for supraclass masters. Good. Now we might as well find the Black Sword, knock him out and then tie him up before giving him to them. I already sent them all the Blood Bottle gang members that I disliked and it is still insufficient. I even had to softly persuade that cop for corpses. Which part of me looks like an animal breeder? Can I cut that part off? The most annoying part was that the number of vampires were not many, but were short-tempered and bossy. They looked at me as though I am a dog. Thus, with a bad mood, Nicholas took his entourage to the Vine Manor in the night. He lightly waved his hand as a greeting to the other Blood Bottle gang members whose expressions were equally bad. When he walked into the main building of the manor, to the stone staircase, he heard faint sobbings and wretched cries from below. This made Nicholas, who was already in a terrible mood, even more distraught. He resisted the urge to think about the blood food in the dungeon, many of whom were his former colleagues and subordinates. His face was ashen as he went up to the second floor. He pushed open the wooden door of the main hall and looked displeased at the few people in front of him. To be precise, there were 2 people and their food in front of him. One was pretty, fair-skinned, had a red ponytail, sexy and was attractive. The woman that looked like she was about 30 years of age wore a noble's horse riding clothes. She gently pushed away a man whose eyes were in a daze. The seductive woman licked the bloodstain on her lips. She gave a captivating smile to Nicholas and extended her finger to wipe away the blood at her chin. The man that was pushed away seemed like a plundered civilian. He looked absent-minded and his skin was deathly pale. He fell to the ground and twitched. His breathing became weaker and weaker as he soon perished. There were at least 7 to 8 of these that had died from excessive blood loss in the hall. The corpses were dried up with bloodstains everywhere. Fresh blood dripped slowly onto the ground and the table, the sound utterly terrifying. At the full-wall window in the hall was a similarly luxuriously dressed old man with white hair. He stood with both his hands on his back and seemed to be waiting for the moon to rise. Oops. A gentle voice came out from the woman's mouth. Her eyes lit up. Have you sent us something nice to eat? Are there 20 people? Was there any supraclass? Any virgins? Any young children? These damn vampires. Did they go out hunting for living people again? Miss Rolana. Mr. Chris. I just wanted to tell you something. Nicholas suppressed the unhappiness and disgust as he said unhappily to the two vampires, the 20 corpses sent here in the afternoon is the limit. Our blood bank reserves are not that high. When Nicholas said the words blood bank, he remembered the anguished cries in the prison cell and felt nauseated. Oh. The attractive Rolana laughed. Her lips curled upwards and her eyes gradually showed a dangerous gaze. Can the blood of those dead people be eaten? What we want is the blood of the living. Otherwise, if and when I see you Blood Bottle gang members come and go, I might not be able to resist. Rolana revealed her sharp fangs and adopted a charming posture. She placed her forefinger on her sharp thong. With the light from the everlasting lamp along with the bloody backdrop, Rolana had a strange malevolent beauty. 3 distinguished guests. Please understand. The Eternal Star City is the capital. Our capabilities are limited. Nicholas suppressed his anger and quietly replied. But didn't that young and cute Irish Duke said that he could give as many people and as much blood as we wanted? If he found out how his loyal dog is entertaining the guests, he may not give you bones to eat. Ha ha. Loyal dog? Bones? Fuck. As he listened to the peculiar humiliation and mocking words from the arrogant vampire and then thought of the Irish Duke's attitude after the defeat at the Red Street Market, also all the irritation he went through the entire day, Nicholas felt a huge fire burn in his heart. Fucking bitch. There are no living people. Nicholas roared as he ruthlessly slammed the table with his palm, disregarding all the bloodstains on it. Do not think I do not know that you vampires only need the blood of the dead to keep living. You do not need the blood of the living at all. This is no longer like hundreds of years ago. I worked so hard to bring all these living and dead here. There was even one supraclass and you complained that it is still not fucking enough? If you want to eat, eat. Otherwise, get lost. I am not easily frightened. Worst comes to worst, we will just part ways. We will just pull back our troops and fight. We are from Blood Bottle Gang of Constellation, we repay blood debts. We are not like Covendir who dies for his friends. There was a moment of silence, except for the heavy breathing of the Red Viper in the hall. Even Nicholas's entourage retreated back a little from fear. After that, Rolana's expression changed. She extended her fangs and her expression turned malevolent. Her originally alluring voice like a spoiled child became sharp and wild. Inferior mortals. I will be polite and give your master some face. Blood of corpses? You yourself could live on water, vegetables, and rotting flesh. Why do you need to drink wine and eat meat? You worked hard? That half-dead supraclass was just used by you to avenge private wrongs. You just want us to help you settle your internal affairs. You want to talk about repaying blood debts to the Corleone family? I can have you experience your paying of blood debts right now. The anger in Nicholas's eyes became more intense. He gritted his teeth and pulled open his scarlet jacket. The sinister Rolana gave a delicate cry and jumped onto the top of the chandelier. She brandished her fangs and claws like a cat. Just at the moment both sides had their daggers drawn, the old man at the window turned around. Rolana. Be mindful of your manners. Mr. Nicholas. There is no need for this. If we fall out, the one embarrassed would be Duke Zayn. His voice was not loud but clearly resounded in the ears of everyone in the hall. Chris Corleone, the white-haired old man, suddenly appeared in front of Nicholas. Before the boss of the Blood Bottle Gang could react, Chris stretched out his hand and patted the Red Viper's shoulder. The old man's act restrained Red Viper's anger. Rolana descended back to the ground and returned to her captivating appearance. She laughed but her eyes still looked fierce. Apologies. They are still young and cannot control their temper. Chris gave a cryptic glance. His wrinkled face was dark and silent. Young? Nicholas cursed in his heart. You have the nerve to call a monster that is several hundred years old, young? However, Nicholas still suppressed the anger in his heart. The circumstances do not favor him. This old monster looked sickly but the skill he showed with his hand just now, with my own capabilities, I would not be able to deal with him. How about this? The past few days have been exhausting for you. From now on we will deal with the matters of food by ourselves. Chris' eyes remained fixed like his lifeless tone. You will solve it yourself? Based on the characteristics of the vampires, hunting for prey outside would eventually turn into a disaster. But doesn't that concur with my wishes? Let's go. Nicholas waved indignantly. Take all our brothers away. Oh? Are you not even leaving one behind? There are people who still want to apologize here. Rolana alluringly lay down on the bloody table and returned to her coquettish self. There is no need. Nicholas turned his head back and replied. It is best to avoid making Miss Rolana unable to resist. The thugs of the Blood Bottle Gang followed behind Nicholas and went downstairs. No one felt regret leaving the nauseating manor. After a while, only the sound of Rolana's weird laughter and the dripping of blood remained in the hall. Nicholas soon went far away. Rolana suddenly got down from the table. Her face was cold and stern. Did he notice something? Chris shook his death-like head. He looked like a white chess piece from afar. This guy did not, but Covendir had certainly noticed something strange. After all, so much blood is enough to feed a squad of blood knights. Rolana lowered her head. However, this is still not enough. I just wasted another one just to put on an act. I will go hunting again. Fortunately, we have chased away the blood bottle gang as planned. This will give us some time before we get exposed. Chris suddenly turned his head back about 100 degrees and looked out the window. His nose twitched a little. Istron has returned. He also brought back this fragrance. It is high-class blood. His figure reappeared at the window. The moon came out. Nicholas took the blood bottle gang group and angrily stepped out of the manor. These damn vampires, HM? That white-faced vampire has returned. Didn't he follow those mercenaries to Mindy's Hall to find treasure in the afternoon? So, he also knows how to use his legs to walk, using the main gate? Nicholas had thought that when the vampire was in a hurry, like what he had once seen, he would transform into watery blood and flow around. That white-faced vampire even brought back a boy? Damn. He also went out hunting for food? Looking at the way he is dressed, he must be from a noble family. However, he is covered in injuries. That is not right. That child does not look like he is being held hostage. Their footsteps look as though they are walking as a group. That's right. I need to ask about the theft at Mindy's Hall. While Nicholas was thinking, Istron and Thales entered the manor. From afar, Thales already saw the blood bottle gang that was walking out. When he thought of the flag with the iris flower, he gloomily cried out in his heart. He knew that they had to remain calm so that he could find a way to survive the dangers ahead. Istron gazed fixedly ahead as though he did not pay attention to those from the blood bottle gang. Nicholas waved his hand and the blood bottle gang stopped and waited for Istron to come over. However, the handsome blonde-haired vampire simply snorted through his nose. His head looked towards the side as he impolitely walked past the red viper. It was as though he had no words to say. However, the vampire immediately noticed that the human that was not even as tall as his waist strode forward with his head held high. The kid huffed and synchronized his pace as he walked past Nicholas with his nose held high. What kind of situation is this? Is he using his master to bully others? Istron resolved himself to punish the child that loved to play dumb. Only Thales knew that he himself was pretending to be calm by strongly suppressing the beating of his heart. Nicholas's anger rose again. Hey! Pretty boy. The red viper blocked Istron's path. Have you completed the task His Excellency the Duke has asked you to do? Nicholas asked in a bad mood as he looked at the handsome vampire. His Excellency the Duke? Thales secretly questioned. Istron looked up at the human who stopped him with disgust. The stolen treasure at Mindy's Hall. Did you remember? You even took 4 groups of mercenaries with you. Istron's gaze towards him made Nicholas full of anger. Nicholas walked up to the vampire's nose and loudly shouted, "Pretty boy! Shouldn't you have obtained something? Pretty boy?" Repulsive mortals. Anger welled up in Istron's heart. He originally wanted to deceive the mercenaries by sending them out and then hunt them one by one, treating them as an excellent source of blood to bring back to the manor. He never expected the weird masked man to finish them off at Mindy's Hall. As for the theft at the Mindy's Hall, this was something requested by the Duke of the Iris Flower. I still need to say something. Istron turned to look at Thales. Nobody knew his state of mind that had already turned ice cold. What do I do? What do I do? What do I do? Calm down. The boy told himself. I must save myself. His brain spun wildly as each report and element flashed through his mind and regrouped. Istron lowered his head and looked at the boy. He wondered what to say to Nicholas so as to not lose face in front of the mortals. Nicholas looked at the arrogant Istron. He followed Istron's gaze and then turned to the little boy beside him. Hey, kid. Istron said without paying attention. Everyone looked at Thales. At this moment, Thales took a deep breath. According to the second-year syndrome, I am the man that is to change the world. How can I die here? After that, the others saw the 7-year-old boy's expression turn cold. He shouted before Istron could say his next words. Yes. Your Excellency. Istron froze for a moment. This brat. Why is he suddenly so respectful? However, before he could react, the situation changed. Thales stepped forward without hesitation. He was like a loyal guard standing in between Istron and Nicholas. And then, under the bright moonlight, everyone heard the voice of the young boy with an annoying expression looking at the man currently in charge of the Blood Bottle Gang, the head of the Psionic Warriors, Red Viper Nicholas. The childish voice had an arrogant tone as he shouted. Get lost. Mortals. His Excellency, the noble Istron Corleone does not need a lowly and talkative dog meddling in his affairs. Chapter 26, Negotiation. Everybody did not manage to react and were collectively stunned. Although Nicholas was still in shock, he realized that Thales was shouting at him. Stray dog? The Red Viper's expression changed from bewilderment to shock, then from shame to anger. What did you say, you damn little BSCRD? A member of Blood Bottle Gang poked his fellow gang member beside him, making an expression, signaling that things were not going well. The handsome Estrone reacted, a large variety of expressions appeared on his face, it was a combination of spasms and tremors, tinged with embarrassment and awkwardness. This little brat is too good in acting, is he a character from a play in Dark Knight Temple? Nicholas clenched his fists tightly. He could feel the followers beside him exchanging glances. Their boss had just been insulted by a child right in his face. A child who had just been acting based on instructions by the vampire. This bastard. How dare he, even the blood mystic, known for being cruel and violent, had never insulted me to my face like this. A surge of anger spread through Nicholas's mind. He stared fiercely at Estrone as if wanting to cut out a piece of his face. In Nicholas's point of view, he had performed his duty and inquired about the mission's progress on behalf of the Duke. However, what did that pretty boy do? That damned vampire turned and made a sound, signaling to his little follower. Then, that little bastard in front of the vampire took a step forward, as if he had read his mind. With that infuriating expression on his face, he called Nicholas a lowly stray dog and told him to get lost. But upon hearing what the little bastard said, the vampire's expression morphed into a hideous grin. It was clear that he was snickering at him in delight. That vampire was reveling in the joy of humiliating him. Threatened by high-ranked police, rejected by tricolor iris flowers, persecuted by that damned vampire, and then this little bastard. Thales watched as the Blood Bottle Gang boss expression progressively changed, and as he contemplated whether to insult him further, his vision suddenly blurred. The Red Viper had used his thunder-like speed and skills to grab Thales by the neck with one hand and raised him up. Thales immediately felt his breathing become obstructed. This was not the first time he was strangled. With his face scrunched up, just like the previous time, Thales extended his hand to grab onto his strangler's right hand. But this time, he only felt as if he had grabbed onto skin that was as hard as steel. Nicholas's stubble that made him look ancient was magnified right in front of his eyes. His hideous expression trembled along with his mouth that opened and closed repeatedly. The Red Viper gave a death stare to the vampire in front of him. Pretty boy. Your little pet. Before he could finish, a straight, open palm suddenly appeared before his eyes, the side with the little finger rushing downwards. Nicholas had no choice but to let go. He immediately backed away. Boom. Both of them stood still. With a dark face, Nicholas grabbed onto Estrone's swift knife-hand strike that was aimed to attack his head from the side. Since you know that he is my pet, don't mess with him, the blonde Estrone spoke with a disgusted expression, mortal creature. Thales fell onto the floor. Unable to help it, he started coughing dryly. He mentally swore that he would never let anyone strangle his throat again. That feeling was too painful. The Blood Bottle Gang members around them became anxious. A lot of them put their hands on the weapons at their waists. Pretty boy, at this moment, Nicholas was already expressionless. However, Thales could feel that his gloominess was slowly rising. The Red Viper let go of the Blood Clansman's hand and slowly enunciated each word. Why don't you try calling me that again? Although this mortal creature wasn't fast, his battle instincts and experience aren't bad, he even managed to grab my right hand. When dealing with someone like this, even though I'm able to overpower him in terms of speed, I still need to be careful. I didn't expect that he would be an elite near supreme class. Estrone's heart sank as he contemplated his next move. What's with the annoyed expression? Estrone's gaze became grim. Am I wrong? You? The next moment, the blonde noble let out a sudden, angry shout. Mortal creature! Before he even finished shouting, Nicholas's fist and Estrone's palm met in the air. To Thales, the moment the fist and palm collided, it was as though the world had stopped. But in the next moment, it was as though all sound and wind swept past in a visible ripple. Bang! When it felt like time was moving again, the strong wind brought about by their fight suddenly charged towards Thales and swept past his face, forcing him to close his eyes. Boom! Bang! Two more gusts of wind swept past, Thales rolled around with his eyes shut. He only managed to avoid the strong wind surrounding Estrone and Nicholas after moving a few meters back. Is this all the speed you can muster? The blonde noble smiled strangely, then moved in a flash once again. Nicholas, who knew that he was not fast enough, clenched his teeth and threw his next punch. Like a phantom, Estrone's silhouette would appear for 1 second, then disappear in the next. In contrast, Nicholas was attacking relentlessly at high speed, like a mechanical gear, and his strikes were becoming increasingly fierce. Both parties sported maniacal expressions and exchanged punches 6 times in the blink of an eye. The strong wind brought about by the meeting of fists and palms left the Blood Bottle Gang members around them with no choice but to shield themselves with their arms. There was no way for them to interrupt the fight. Thales recalled the duel between Jayla and Ralph as they fought at their maximum speed. But for that case, it was a fight between speed and agility. For the pair in front of him, it was more like a battle between explosive power and speed. Estrone took a step back in a flash while Nicholas dragged his left leg a step backward. They glared fiercely at each other. Something is wrong. Why is this mortal from a gang getting faster and faster? He even caught up with my speed in the end. Estrone frowned. Humph. This vampire is indeed extremely agile. I will make you fall with my next attack. Nicholas sported a ferocious expression. Both of them bore somber expressions. They could sense their opponent's toughness and endurance. Without warning, they exchanged fists again. Vampire! Nicholas shouted furiously as his red coat fell onto the floor. He spun his body around while still maintaining balance, and the blood vessels in his right arm bulged. Then, he threw his right fist on the blood clansman's chest. The punch was equally astonishing in terms of spirit and speed. Mortal creature. Istron spat scornfully and immediately bared his fangs in fury. A bloody mist covered his whole body while his silhouette flickered between being an illusion and having a corporeal form. Claws grew on the fingers of his right hand. He spread out his palm and grazed past the air, grabbing onto Nicholas's throat. Thales shuddered. He immediately imitated the blood bottle gang members around him and raised both of his arms to protect himself in anticipation of the next, probably most brutal gust of strong wind. Both parties struck after accumulating strength in their attacks and interlocked in the air. Thales shut his eyes tight. But the anticipated blast of strong wind and deafening thump did not come. As you people have already greeted each other, a raspy voice spoke languidly, it's time to disperse. Thales slowly opened his eyes. Istron's sharp claws and Nicholas's heavy punch were held tightly by both hands of an old noble who suddenly appeared on the scene. His face was as pale and gloomy as a corpse. It was as if all the strength and vigor in their attacks from before had disappeared without a trace in the old man's palms. It can't be? Even if he managed to block the impact between those two, there had to be at least shock mitigation and inertia. How can an exchange of force at that level show no signs at all? Thales thought in fear. The old man turned from left to right, looking at both of them. Istron's expression was indignant while Nicholas's was filled with wariness along with a tinge of surprise. Supreme Class, the Red Viper muttered to himself. Not only that, he is an elite within the Supreme Class. Only Blood Clan Dukes, or even Marquises, possess this strength. Even within the 6 great pillars in the Blood Clan's Grand Banquet Hill, there aren't many people like this. The old man flashed a hideous smile and released his hands in the blink of an eye. Without having to be reminded, the two who were fighting took a step back. Sir Nicholas, you do not have to lock horns with a young person. Please leave right now. His dry lips opened and closed like a puppet. Nicholas looked at the followers around him. Their faces were full of fear and anxiety. God damn it, such an unlucky day. He began to understand that if the Blood Mystic did not return, nothing would go right for Blood Bottle Gang. Looks like I'll have to personally head to Steel City and invite her back no matter what price had to be paid. Humph. Nicholas angrily snorted. He looked at the old man, and then at Istron, who was provoking him with his glare. Clenching his teeth, he spoke, okay, fine. Hopefully, the Duke and all the Knights of Eradication under him are as good-tempered as I am. The red flush had not disappeared from Nicholas's face, but he did not speak any further. He waved his hand and left with the others. Little bastard, when they suck your blood dry, as Nicholas was leaving the manor, he turned and glared fiercely at Thales. His tone was venomous. Don't scream too miserably. He took his coat from his follower. After he put it on, all Blood Bottle Gang members left the manor. Thales sighed in his heart. He had managed to live through this, had even managed to live through the incident in Mindy's Hall. He was safe for now. However, the strange old man's next sentence made Thales' heart beat with fear once again. So, my little friend, I am guessing that you are probably related to their mission in Mindy's Hall, am I right? Istron Corleone turned his head around like a puppet, cracked a smile with his wrinkle-filled lips and said, it seems that both Tricolor Iris Flowers and Blood Bottle Gang are very interested in you? So, you were saying that, on the second day of his arrival, you, being His Majesty's most trusted attendant, the former Foreign Affairs Minister, the head and signatory of the Fortress Treaty, Count Gilbert Queso, and you, His Majesty's most reliable secret protector, the nameless person, Yodel Cato, whose background is unknown to me. It was a mature female voice. As the sun set, it rang on Mindy's Hall's roof. Lost His Majesty's only child and heir, just like that? The woman was mature and dignified. She was a charming 40-year-old woman donned in the standard green and blue uniform of first-grade female officials. In the face of this alluring black-haired woman, both Gilbert and Yodel bowed their heads slightly. Although we are prepared for this woman's arrival, Gilbert thought, I never thought that we would be meeting her under these circumstances. Every time he thought of the woman's special and awkward status, Gilbert felt his head ache. Presumably, Yodel, who was beside him, felt the same. Yes, Lady Jins, Gilbert said quietly. His tone was full of angst and regret. Yodel did not say anything, but he was slowly clenching his left fist. You people searched the area for an hour but could not find any clues? Yes, Lady Jins, Gilbert spoke with shame. The gears on Yodel's mask turned a little. And then, the only thing we can depend on, Lady Jins pointed at the lamp in her hand and spoke unhurriedly with a mocking and angry tone, is this worn-out lamp and the little kindling Yodel is holding? Yes, Lady Jins, the pitiful Gilbert continued to answer. Jins did not speak any further. She stared at them for an extremely long time with a displeased expression. Gilbert's heart sank further and further. After a long while, Jins made a nasal huff. She shut her eyes and slowly said, His Majesty's 48th birthday is approaching. I can guarantee you that the 6 great clans' plans are in full operation. They want to coerce His Majesty into selecting a crown prince from among the nobles, whether in the form of adoption or having a child from one of the noble families take the royal surname. And that child was our only hope in the darkness. Jins took a deep breath and opened her eyes. She spoke slowly and clearly, and then, you people, lost him. Gilbert and Yodel lowered their heads further. Men are indeed unreliable. Jins put the bloodline lamp on the roof and exhaled in disdain. All right. Let's dispatch all our people. We will begin searching from where that child disappeared. Even if that child is indeed as intelligent as you say, we cannot just sit around and wait for that lamp. This will only prove that we are incapable and cowardly. Under the night sky, the mature, charming woman suddenly turned her head towards them and growled furiously at them in the kind of tone used to reprimand subordinates. Why are you people still standing here? As if suddenly roused from sleep, Gilbert and Yodel came out of their petrified modes and walked forward. You useless men. You better put in some effort. Thales was pressed onto a chair by Istron inside the manor's inner hall. He swallowed hard and moved his buttocks slightly to the side to avoid a patch of sticky, red substance. Without the dried dead bodies that can be seen everywhere in the hall, the wet and dry patches of bloodstains on the dining table and the floor, and these three obviously abnormal people before me, this place would actually be quite decent. The boy looked at the man, woman, and old man in front of him, and flashed an awkward, friendly, and toothy smile. Such an excellent source of blood. This fragrance, oh my, Istron, as your cousin's sister, it seems that I have looked down on you in the past. I thought that you were only out taking a walk with that group of humans. It was a sexy woman with a red ponytail. She was so excited that her eyes shone. She bent down and carefully scrutinized Thales. Thales only flashed a silly smile. His instincts told him that at the moment, apart from showing friendliness and cooperation, other actions would be inappropriate. He thought about cutting open his hand in secret, but he was sure that the sensitivity towards the smell of blood for these three was definitely higher than Morris Angry Wolfhound. Having heard his cousin's sister's words, Istron's heart missed a beat. Luckily, as a member of the Blood Clan, he did not have the capability to blush. However, he still extended his hands with hesitation and pulled Rolana, who was almost salivating over Thales, backward slightly. In his heart, he had already raised the little brat's level of suspicion and level of danger to the same level as the merfolk in Crystal Wall City and the priests in Sunrise Temple. Rolana, be careful, there's something off about this young brat. It's better not to talk to him too much. In my opinion, we should just connect the phlebotomy device and nutrient canal right away, and then put him in the coffin, the blonde Blood Clan member said awkwardly. He is a target that Duke Irisflower is especially looking for, stays in a heavily guarded royal property and ordered a first-grade Blood Clan knight of Corleone family about. That knight did not even notice it, the old man with the deathly still countenance spoke quietly. Istron, who was beside him, turned away in embarrassment. Of course there is something wrong with this young brat. We have to at least dig out all the secrets he has from his mouth, this is my expertise. On the dining table to Thales' left, Rolana lied on her stomach and licked her lips while watching him. Make a small opening on his wrist and hang him upside down. As we interrogate him, we can satisfy our appetites. Not a single drop will be wasted. I heard from my mother that the Loria family always did this. Istron hesitated for a bit. As he grew up, Chris, the butler, had traumatized Istron. Additionally, the old man's merciless reprimand just now severely scarred his self-confidence. However, Istron still spoke in a low murmur. I feel that we should get rid of him right away. With our situation right now, it feels like this brat will bring us trouble. Shut up, fool. Chris, the old man, crudely cut Istron off. This young man. If it was not for his attitude, he would not be a mere Blood Clan knight in the Corleone family after 300 years with his skills. Intelligent ones like Rolana have long since become Blood Clan baronesses. Because of the old man's awe-inspiring presence, the blonde noble took a step back in fear. But it was too late. Thales' heart jolted. He keenly caught onto this piece of information, with our situation right now. Does that mean that they're not in a favorable situation? Firstly, if they were mercenaries or allies of that big noble duke, having completed their task, they would at least be commissioned and rewarded by their employers. Why would their situation be unfavorable? Secondly, they did not hand me over to Blood Bottle Gang at the first opportunity. This might be explained by the fact that they are fighting against Blood Bottle Gang for that duke's favor. However, based on Istron's words, they don't even plan on handing me over to the duke. Therefore, are they planning to obtain the secret from me and use it for their own benefit? Then there wouldn't be many other possible explanations. They're not the duke's mercenaries or allies, but another independent force. Perhaps this was where his chance of survival lay. Upon reprimanding Istron, the old man did not say anything else. Instead, he stared long and hard at Thales, giving him immense psychological pressure. The boy knew that he could not remain silent anymore. In that case, let me give it a go based on the inference just now. I think, Thales chuckled, that maybe we can sit down and talk and exchange information among ourselves? Perhaps we will realize that we are actually allies. Chris' countenance became darker. His eyes flickered like those frame skips in movies, and all of a sudden, he stood before Thales, just an inch away. He did not even ruffle the wind with his movements. Thales' heart pounded hard. I'll just pretend that I'm watching a ghost movie, in 4D. This is a good idea, young sir. Let us exchange information, then. Chris flashed a hideous smile again. The way the old man addressed Thales reminded him of Gilbert, and what he said made Thales loosen up. However, his next sentence changed that. And the information we have is that your meager life is in our hands. Thales heaved a long sigh in his heart. Such bad luck, encountering people who don't play by the rules. Chris slowly raised his malicious, deathly still gaze. And may I know about the information you have? As Thales frantically contemplated his next step, something unexpected happened. Boom! Boom! Suddenly, dull sounds produced by the banging of something heavy rang from the top part of the hall. The three Blood Clan members collectively changed. Even the old Chris was not exempted from this. Boom. 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 Another dull banging sound was heard. It came from the ceiling. The three Blood Clan members exchanged glances. They were surprised and excited. It was as if something they had looked forward to for a long time was finally happening. Thales saw all of this. Chapter 27, Old Friend. The dead bodies of the 8 swordsmen who were guarding Sir Thales, when the incident happened, were left here. This is not only out of respect but also because things were urgent. We did not touch them at all, and they are in the same state as they were when the incident happened. Gilbert spoke to Jins, who was sporting a solemn expression in the corridor on Mindy's Hall's 2nd floor, in front of the 8 dead bodies. Whereas, Yodel stood quietly beside them. 6 of them are highly skilled ordinary-class swordsmen, with plenty of battle experience and had the potential to reach supraclass. The other 2 were genuine supraclass elites. All of them had their carotid arteries cut open by an irregular, sharp weapon. Gilbert walked towards one of the dead bodies and squatted down, pressing on the dead body's neck. A hideous and horrifying wound was seen. The wound had changed color and the blood had hardened. Based on our tentative estimation, the person might be a supreme-class elite. To be able to strike these 8 people to death in a split second, that person has to possess ingenious skills and immeasurable strength. Even Yodel could not catch up to his speed. And the person also has a fearsome capability when it comes to hiding. As the intrusion happened, we guarded all the entrances and exits. However, he still managed to sneak in, and Yodel never noticed anyone there. Gilbert speculated with a gloomy expression. He took out a mechanical watch from his bosom and looked at the time on it. It was 6:30 in the evening. Even the moon was rising. Jin's brows were tightly furrowed and her considerably charming lips were also tightly pursed, accentuating the beauty mole beside her mouth. She held her arms in both hands and was deep in contemplation for a while. She then suddenly raised her hands and made a clicking sound with her fingers. Take off their helmets. Gilbert motioned the guards to do so with one glance, and the few guards beside them went forward at the same time and took off the helmets from the dead bodies. Jins walked forward with her elegant high-heeled, female official boots and kneeled down on a single knee. She carefully observed each of their faces. Their carotid arteries were bleeding heavily. They wouldn't have had much time before they died, only enough for them to struggle for a while on the floor. This would be when they see the murderer. The expressions of every single one of them, Jin spoke carefully while bending herself down to observe, are slightly different. These 4 are lying on their backs, and their expressions before dying were identical: rage, hatred, indignation, and vexation. It is possible that they did not have the chance to react at all before being dealt a heavy blow which killed them. Only those who did not know the truth up until they died would feel this sort of indignation and resentment. In contrast, these 2 are lying on their sides. Their expressions are shock, disbelief, and bewilderment. They probably knew that the murderer's deadly blow was coming and tried their best to strike back but to no avail. This made them shocked and confused. As they struggled on the floor, this expression was fixated on their faces. The last 2 were probably the ones with the highest capabilities. One is lying on his back and another is sitting against the wall. Their expressions are a lot subtler compared to the previous 6 people. For the one lying down, it is one of regret and pain. For the one sitting down, it was one of relief and resignation. They tried their best to strike back too but still failed. However, they are probably the last ones to die and were able to see the murderer while struggling on the floor. That was why before they died, they experienced regret and a sudden revelation. In other words, the 2 of them would have been able to effectively reiterate if they knew the enemy's identity beforehand. Jin stood up wearing a cold expression and crossed her arms. While she looked at Gilbert who was appearing a little helpless beside her, she spoke with certainty: the murderer is not a supreme class elite. If the murderer was someone from supreme class who was strong, to the point of being undefeatable, the last 2 people's expressions would be that of despair and terror. The murderer probably used a special skill, psionic ability, or device. He strategically attacked the strongest ones first before moving on to the 6 weaker ones. Hence, after the strongest 2 dropped down, they had the chance to see the murderer and his killing method. Even though the murderer had not yet reached supreme class, he is very fast. He is probably almost as fast as, or even faster than half the supreme class elites. But, as he is not yet in supreme class, when it comes to killing people, he still has to do it in sequence. Yodel walked forwards and squatted in front of the dead bodies as though to verify Jin's words. On the other hand, Gilbert looked at the woman in front of him in a daze. It was as though he was looking at the young, enthusiastic girl in the courtroom from 20 years ago, and the inexperienced, cheerful, young man who always stood behind her. He sighed from the bottom of his heart and went in front of her. Lady Jins, I know that you used to be the most distinguished police officer in the capital city, had participated in the investigation of the royal family massacre during the Bloody Year, and also tracked the air mystic. Even the kingdom's secret intelligence department often commissioned your assistance. Your inference is extremely brilliant and as sharp as it used to be years ago. However, our urgent task at hand is to get that child back, said Gilbert calmly while placing his hands behind his back. Jins contemplated and shot him a glance. The most distinguished police officer? She unknowingly clenched her fists. Police officer? Rubbish. However, the charming lady did not show any emotion. Instead, out of habit, she stroked the beauty mole on the right side of her lips with her left hand which was propped up on her right hand. She chuckled lightly. Men are indeed the epitome of carelessness and recklessness. Gilbert narrowed his eyes and tipped his hat slightly to show his puzzlement. Have I not made it clear enough? Jins lowered her hands and took huge, bold strides forward. She pointed at the dead body before her and spoke with confidence. These two superclass guards were the strongest. They stood together and were the first ones attacked, these two were next, and the other four were the last ones in the assault. However, the order of their deaths was the opposite. The strongest two struggled until the end and saw the murderer. I only need to know the positions they were at before they were assaulted. Then, I can trace the pathway and identify the murderer's point of entry. The heavy amount of bleeding has mixed together all the bloodstains, making it hard to find the trail where the guards struggled on before they died. But based on the time the arteries started bleeding, and the time it took for them to fall and struggle on the floor, two circles can be drawn with the two strongest guards as the center. The two circles would be the range of movement of all the guards from before they were ambushed, up until their deaths. Do not forget that the two strongest guards were assaulted by the same type of weaponry at almost the same time. Which meant that they were standing together before they were attacked. Hence, the intersection point between these two circles would be the position where they were ambushed. But there are two circles, and thus, two intersection points. Only one of the intersection points is the answer, the true position where these two were assaulted, and the position from where the murderer intruded. With a focused look, Jins traced the shapes with her footsteps as she walked. What she had said made Gilbert and Yodel watch her solemnly. Based on the gaze of the two strongest guards before they died, after killing everyone, the murderer went to this position. I believe that this was also where the child stood. Based on the murderer's final spot where he revealed himself. Jins walked towards the position and began taking steps back before continuing, and based on the order to which they were ambushed, we can find the path the murderer took. Jin slowly moved past those corpses before she returned to the two corpses who were formerly the most powerful of their group. The end of the path connects the region between these two circles. The closest one among them is this intersection point. Jins moved past these corpses that were scattered all over the place and eventually stood on one spot of the murder scene with a fierce look in her eyes. This is where the two strongest were initially attacked. In other words, it was the spot where the murderer infiltrated, and also the spot where he first attacked from. Gilbert took a few quick steps forward before he looked around. Are you saying that the murderer appeared here suddenly? He spoke slowly. The mercenaries have indeed attacked up to this point, but that is impossible. This place is still very far from the stairs. The murderer had no place to hide when we were cleaning up the mess. Jins let out another light chuckle that was filled with scorn. Only Yodel walked forwards quietly and pointed to a small decorative vase to the side. This type of vase was commonly used in the corridors, but only this vase was closest to Jins. Under Gilbert's puzzled gaze, Jins moved briskly forward and seized the vase before she smashed it without hesitation. Clang! She crouched down quietly and picked up a shattered piece of the vase. Once she had scrutinized it, she swept her finger across the inner side of the shattered piece lightly, then showed it to the two useless men. To his shock, Gilbert discovered that there was red blood on Jin's finger. Yodel crouched down as well and picked up a few of the shattered pieces. There were also tiny bloodstains on the inner side of the other vase pieces. He had nowhere to hide? Jins let out a mocking laugh, causing Gilbert some embarrassment. So, Gilbert received the shattered piece of the vase, and his expression changed. This is. Jin stood up and with the voice of experience, said, number of victims, 8. Cause of death, bleeding of the carotid artery. Culprit, a superclass Blood Clan member, also known as a vampire. Murder weapon, the claws of a Blood Clan member. Just as Jins was speaking excitedly, she was suddenly startled as she became aware of her current situation. So she gritted her teeth and swallowed the rest of her words. After all, I am no longer a police officer. Jin shook her head and cleared away all the emotions irrelevant to the situation. So he infiltrated the manor and hid himself with his inborn ability to morph into blood, then with his gift of reaching maximum speed in an instant, he killed these people and kidnapped. Of course he didn't do it with his own abilities. Jins lifted her head and rolled her eyes at Gilbert. This is the supreme class elite you spoke of? Gilbert was feeling incredibly embarrassed, but he knew that this was not the time for him to try and defend himself, which was why he decided to ask politely and amiably, what an eye-opener. So, where is the child? This is an eye-opener? Jins thought scornfully. I knew it, you're one of those high-ranking nobles with a really narrow outlook on life. If you've seen Constellation's Secret Intelligence Department, saw Extet's Darkroom, saw the Raven Robe Guards in Main Ignox Dynasty, as well as Handball's Kantana, and when you've seen the methods they use, you will know just how many terrifying people there are lurking in the dark corners under the stage you stand on. Just a slight twitch of their fingers and they will know all your secrets. Then, with a sharp gaze, she said with certainty, the crime when the incident occurred, the sun had yet to set. He could only use blood guys to hide among the mercenaries. He is a blood clansman that hasn't reached supreme class yet. That is why he can only transform into liquid while using his blood guys, and he can last no more than half an hour in this state. This can only mean that the mercenaries had rushed here within a half hour. A group of mercenaries is pressing onward at full speed. Only the eastern city district where the nobles' manors are, the town hall, merchants' gathering, and the central region where the Renaissance Palace lies is half an hour away from Twilight District. Jins exhaled a sigh. This mature woman ended her deduction and moved an exploratory hand behind her waist out of pure habit, but found nothing there. She was momentarily stunned before she started laughing bitterly in her heart. That's right, I'm no longer a police officer. I've even stopped smoking a long time ago. The trainee who always followed behind her to provide her a lighter had also long since changed into another person, had he not? She heaved a sigh. The sagacious lady stopped reminiscing and looked at Gilbert. Make your decision, Count. Gilbert inhaled deeply and said, the ones who will send someone to investigate will definitely be the nobles. The area in Eastern City District is not small, and the manors are the most suitable places to hide members of the Blood Clan. Even though there are quite a number of manors there. With one move, Yodel disappeared. Gilbert choked back his words upon seeing his colleague's rude action. He could only heave a sigh. Oh well, at least the search area is reduced. Gilbert looked towards Jins and softly nodded to her. Jins only sneered at him. Gilbert did not take that to heart and instead began ordering his people again. Open the backup armory and reorganize the troops. Equip them with silver exorcism swords. Pick 30 of the best fighters to follow me. Our destination is the Eastern City District. Bring the lamp along. Boom boom. Boom boom. 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 The muffled sounds on the ceiling continued, and it was getting more and more vigorous. Chris whipped his head around, wearing a slightly anxious expression for the first time. He looked at Thales with a hostile gaze and said to Istrone, send him to the dungeon and lock him up well. Then, without waiting for Istrone and Thales' reaction, the old man and Rolana disappeared together. Istrone also wore a surprised expression. He lifted Thales up and, ignoring the other's struggles and screams, hey, what's going on? Aren't we about to exchange information? Oh, Honorable Istrone, Thales flung him towards the stone stairs. In the following second, while he still felt dizzy, Thales fell headfirst onto the wet stone floor. Bang! He grimaced in pain. Little brat. Stay here and be good. We will be able to hear whatever you are doing. After an audible click from the key in Istrone's anxious words, the surroundings became silent. Thales got up, feeling troubled but relieved. Istrone had disappeared. So he quietly extended his hand to his lap and, while pretending to scratch an itch, cut his hand on JC's dagger which was tied there. A surge of pain followed. His blood dripped onto the floor. It's here. Thales inhaled deeply, welcoming the burning sensation throughout his body. This way, I guess Gilbert and Yodel would be able to identify my position? He exhaled lightly and completely relaxed his body, but a sense of fatigue suddenly hit him. The boy trembled as he crawled to a wall and propped his body against it. Today's experience will definitely not lose out to yesterday's trip to Red Street Market. It was only now that Thales had the time to observe the conditions around him. The lightning was dull, and it came from 2 minuscule torches. The floor was made of stone and was wet, cold, and hard. The mottled walls were full of scratches and marks, with a narrow, metal railing with huge locks as thick as an arm. His feet kicked on some rusty shackles nearby and they made a ringing sound. Thales heaved a sigh and lied on the ice-cold floor. No doubt, this is a prison cell. It is wet, muddy, and filled with a bloody stench. A bloody stench? Thales could smell the foul and salty stench in the air. It was similar to what he smelled in Red Street Market yesterday, but this was even stronger. His heart tightened as frightening screams and moans echoed from outside his prison cell. Ah! Thales was so frightened that he stood up. From what he remembered, he never had much tolerance for horror movies. It was always some person, whose name he could not remember, with terminal adolescent delusion syndrome who forcefully dragged him along to watch them together. In what that person called training his bravery. From the horrifying stimulation, Thales' mind began operating at an insane speed again. Prison cell. Bloody smell. Blood clan. Screams and moans. Thales suddenly knew what place this was, it was the food cabinet of the Blood Clan. A wave of nausea hit him. Thales heaved another sigh. The number of sighs he had made these past few days were probably more than the water he drank. As he was about to sit down, faint and ragged panting sounds suddenly came from beside him. Ha! Ha! Ah! He was so scared that he crawled a few steps in the opposite direction. Please stop scaring me. On tenterhooks, Thales patted his chest, then he realized that his prison cell was not a luxurious single room. Thales slowly inched towards the source of the panting sound. Under the dim light, he could see a human form, lying on the floor wearing heavy shackles, panting painfully. Ugh! In the dark, it was as though the prisoner could not speak. He only panted continuously, his voice full of pain and suffering. His wrists were tightly secured by the shackles, and there seemed to be a tube that ran from inside the wrist to outside the cell. Thales knew what that was. Istrone had once said this, in my opinion, we should just connect the phlebotomy device and nutrient canal right away, and then put him in the coffin. Seeing this, there was no doubt it was phlebotomy device. Ha! Thales lowered his head and helplessly heaved a sigh yet again. It's probably some poor soul who was kidnapped here by the Blood Clan and became their food source. Ugh, ugh. As though sensing that someone had arrived, the prisoners struggled and moaned. Thales felt another wave of nausea. Due to nausea, he decided that he had to do something. I'm sorry, this might hurt a little, please bear with it for a while. He softly said to the poor prisoner. The boy extended his hand and held the prisoner's waist. Grabbing onto the thick phlebotomy device, he pulled off a needle with all his might, forcing out the needle that had been buried a few inches deep inside the prisoner's blood vessel. Ah! Ugh! The prisoner's struggling and moaning intensified. He kept making indecipherable noises, like a mute. Thales pressed onto the wound on the prisoner's wrist. Fortunately, there was not much bleeding. Of course, it's possible that he didn't have much blood left to begin with, Thales thought dejectedly. When dealing with the 3 blood clansmen just now, although Thales felt anxious and terrified, he had never felt weighed down by sadness. But instead, seeing this chained-up source of blood had, for some reason, made him start to have a heavy heart. Perhaps it's out of pity, he thought self-deprecatingly. Thales touched the shackles, and only then did he notice that it was a mechanical shackle made of dull black stone. It was covered with carvings of complicated patterns and words, heavy but intricate. It secured the prisoner's arms over his chest in such a manner that he was forced to cross his arms. 2 clamp locks extended upwards and tightly clamped the prisoner's 2 cheeks, making him unable to turn his head. Pushing it with all his might, Thales realized that this heavy mechanical shackle was either secured to the floor or was so heavy that it was as if it has been secured to the floor. It seemed like a heavy shackle specially prepared for elites. Thales felt for the hasp and found it. It was made of some kind of special metal. At that moment, the metal suddenly increased in temperature. A burst of searing heat went through the lock. Ah! Thales involuntarily cried out in pain and let go of the hasp. The boy frowned and tried touching the hasp again. Upon contact, the hasp would flare up with high temperature. It looked as if he had no way of unlocking the shackles. The prisoner's struggling slowly decreased. Looking at his painful struggling and suffering, Thales felt extremely uncomfortable. However, he could only quietly retreat to the side and sit against the wall. As Thales moved, the light from the torch outside the prison cell was no longer shielded and shone directly on the prisoner's face. Thales saw the pitiable person clearly. His body was covered in wounds. The grey clothing on his body was torn and filthy. He was also handicapped. His legs were gone from the knees down. His neck was even scarier, the flesh and blood there had all meshed up and was a terrifying purplish-black color. It was as though his throat suffered a grave injury. That was probably the reason he could not talk. Thales touched his own neck. Recalling his 2 experiences of being strangled and the pain that came with it, he could not help but shiver. Looking at the prisoner, he thought quietly. What a pitiful person. To be able to live up until now with all those injuries, it is quite a miracle. The prisoner's expression was exaggerated. As he panted, his facial features twisted, as if enduring a great pain, but he could only make rough moans. His short green hair covered half his face. A weird tattoo covered the other half of his face. He continued moaning in pain. Wait. Thales was suddenly stunned. He recognized the tattoo on the person's face. Thales was suddenly aware that this person sharing the prison cell with him, panting and unable to talk, was an old friend of his. It was an old friend whom he and Jayla had just bumped into at Red Street Market the day before, my dear Ralph. One of the best in Blood Bottle Gang's strongest 12. The psionic who was an expert in manipulating the wind. Supra-class elite. Phantom Wind follower, Ralph. Chapter 28, the first mystic ability test. What does despair feel like? Ralph felt that he knew the answer to this question. That immense pain when his larynx was shattered and torn apart by that female bartender from the Brotherhood, he did not know Jayla's name yet, made him feel as if it happened just 5 minutes ago. And ever since then, it was as though he endured that pain every single second. Blood flowed in reverse from his throat into his lungs. The immense pain was transmitted to his brain from his throat. Even his airways were blocked. He was unable to speak. He was unable to breathe. He was unable to move. It was as though he was a heavily injured and dying stray dog that had simply been abandoned on Red Street Market. Whether he eventually dies from pain, suffocation or choking, his hours are numbered. The only thing that urged him to stay alive was his desire for life, which was born within him when he was roaming the streets of Camus Union during his childhood. As a psionic who controls the wind, he repeatedly used his psionic ability to push mouthful after mouthful of air full of dust, blood, and filth into his torn throat towards his lungs, as if he was squeezing a sponge. He then squeezed out the exhaled breath from another wound on the back of his neck. Inhale. Exhale. Every single breath was accompanied by an immense, inhuman pain. It was like the sort of suffering one goes through when going back and forth between hell and earth. I'm probably the first person to ever extend life using one psionic ability, Ralph thought with sorrow. Ralph felt that his current condition was very similar to the stray dogs that lived by gathering rubbish in sewers. The female bartender left. The cop left. A few groups of thugs walked past his heavily injured and dying body. A scout turned him over and felt his mouth and nose for any breath. An earth-shattering explosion traveled into his ears. Ralph did not care. He could only instinctively breathe in mouthful after mouthful of air using his psionic ability under the immense pain. He did that until daybreak, when Numea, who was retreating in panic, hoisted up his dead body. Numea used to be a village hunter and was regarded as the coward among the strongest 12. Ralph had always looked down on him, and the Phantom Wind followers' favorite pastime was to ridicule, insult, and bully him in the Brotherhood. The most ironic fact was that in his last moments, this coward whom he had always scorned was the one who took care of his dead body. Ralph was jolted awake by the immense pain that came from his legs. His hands were tightly bound. When he opened his eyes, he was at the mortuary of the police station. Then he saw Nicholas. The head of Blood Bottle Gang's 8 cadres. Ralph did not know that 5 of them died during the battle on Red Street Market, Nicholas the Red Viper. However, Nicholas only stared at him with a complicated gaze and shook his head disdainfully and with a fierce expression on his face. You are one of the few people from Blood Bottle Gang who survived, the Red Viper said airily. Ralph struggled, wanting to speak while enduring the pain in his throat, but he could only make nonsensical ha-ha sounds. He felt a flare of immense pain on his knee. However, he could not feel anything below his knees. Look at you, Ralph. The best one and the only supraclass elite among the strongest 12. The young man with endless glory, who was proudly recommended by Lady Catherine to the air mystic. The Red Viper softly tapped his face, gaze still complicated and full of hatred. He said mockingly, now, you are lying here like a dead body, unable to speak, unable to breathe, unable to move, and unable to eat. Why are you still alive? The Red Viper arched his brow and his countenance became hideous and frenzied. Why did you survive instead of Kirk's, Song, Sven, or Dorno? Why was it you? Why was it Catherine's follower who survived instead of mine? Ralph widened his eyes, struggling with anger and pain. However, the immense pain and injury that came from 2 spots of his body prevented him from moving. The Red Viper quelled his anger and instead started laughing loudly. He laughed jubilantly, happily, and insanely. Blood Bottle Gang suffered huge losses, and my forces were also considerably damaged, he said softly. If all of Catherine's personnel were still around, she might be able to be promoted while using me as a stepping stone. This is a possibility. Nicholas's expression became hideous. However, how would a Phantom Wind follower who can't talk, has no legs, is injured, and on death's door, be of her service? That's why. Nicholas extended his hands, and with a twisted face, squeezed the wounds on Ralph's knees that had been cauterized to stop the bleeding. Why don't you just die in battle and disappear? Ralph shut his eyes tight in the midst of the immense pain and struggled with all his might, although his body could not move due to the heavy injuries. He did not do so to break free but to alleviate the pain in his knees. Even the psionic ability to control the air that he relied on to breathe was almost halted. My mood is really bad today. While cleaning up the mess, I faced obstacles everywhere. Nicholas heaved a sigh and continued speaking, but after getting rid of you, a genius well regarded by Catherine, I'll feel very happy. Seeing the hatred, pain, and anger in Ralph's eyes, Nicholas sported an apologetic and resigned expression. He smilingly said, there was no choice, they especially requested for a superclass elite and even emphasized that the wrists must be intact for them to obtain blood. Otherwise, I would really have liked to chop off your hands instead of your legs. In the end, he tapped Ralph's face and spoke beside his ear in a deep voice, I hope that you get along joyfully with the vampires. As Nicholas's footsteps faded, 2 Blood Bottle Gang thugs walked up to him. One of them held a 3-inch-long needle attached to a tube. The other grabbed Ralph's lethargic wrist. At that moment, Ralph felt great despair. Thales watched Ralph in a daze. He had the urge to ask him about what happened to Jayla after that, and about the result of their battle. Did Jayla escape? Why was Ralph in this state? Was he not part of Blood Bottle Gang? However, Thales hesitated, because he saw Ralph's current state. The legless man's gaze was unfocused, and he could only convey his emotions through meaningless groans. His gaze was a mixture of despair, pain, regret, and sadness. Thales still remembered the Ralph he saw the night before. Ralph was frivolous, confident, arrogant, and possessed extraordinary skills. He moved about freely in the unending gusts of violent wind, leaving behind his trademark laughter. But now. Ralph shut his eyes tight and started moaning in pain again. The Phantom Wind follower who was once willful, mean, and fearless, did not exist anymore. His lips were greenish-black and dry, a clear sign of severe dehydration. However, Thales could not find any water. He was also not sure if Ralph could still swallow in his current condition. Thales did not know how Ralph was even able to breathe. The boy could only sit by the side in a daze and watch Ralph suffering in pain while struggling to live. The second year after he transmigrated, a female child beggar had both her legs broken by quide. Before dying, the poor girl wailed all night. At that time, Thales was still in a state of ignorance and had only found very few memory fragments. He was panic-stricken, frightened by the horror of reality, and could only hide and shiver in a hole in the wall. Then he had slept and listened to the girl wail through the entire night with a muddled mind. It was similar to what was happening right now. Afterward, he sometimes wondered why he did not have more courage at that moment to end the girl's suffering. Looking at Ralph's disfigured state, Thales' heart felt heavy. No matter how many wrongdoings one has committed, no one deserves this kind of torture, he told himself. In the end, Thales heaved a sigh and climbed towards Ralph's side. He softly said, Ralph, my dear Ralph. Although his consciousness was already slowly fading, at that moment, Ralph's pupils instinctively became focused. Who is this? Who still remembers me, a maimed person who was waiting to die? Thales softly drew out JC's dagger and slowly held it against Ralph's neck. I know that you are in a lot of pain right now, enduring torture and suffering that cannot be imagined by normal people. I can end your life and help free you from all of this. Ralph's breathing, which was completed using his throat and his psionic ability, immediately became chaotic. Torture. Suffering. Escape? However, I have to ask you seriously and carefully. My dear Ralph, are you willing to let me relieve you of your suffering like this? If you are willing, blink once. If you are not willing, I am only asking this once. With a solemn expression, Thales waited for Ralph's reaction. In the darkness, Ralph stared hard at the boy's hazy profile before him. Escape. Ralph felt immense pain from his throat to his knees. Every single breath tore open the wound on his throat. Every struggle affected the part where he was amputated on his knees. He was thirsty, hungry, cold, in pain, and in despair, which was to him the most terrifying emotion. He recalled the sensation of wind fluttering past his body, the first time he killed a person with his psionic ability, the first time he entered Blood Bottle Gang, the first time he received a reward from his superior, the first time he made himself a man on top of a frail girl's body, and the first time he saw the air mystic, as if he was on a pilgrimage. He thought of the fear in his enemy's gaze, the submissive gaze of his compatriots, her expression, full of praise, and the proud and satisfied upwards curve of his lips whenever he heard gossip about the strongest 12. Those were past glories. And he has already lost all of those forever, had he not? The next moment, Ralph's gaze became determined. He used all his might to activate his greatly reduced psionic ability and drew a breath into his half-crippled body. And then, the phantom wind follower trembled. With all his might while enduring the pain from the friction of his cheeks against the clamplock, he raised his head with every ounce of his strength and earnestly gazed at Thales. He prepared to blink. He just needed to blink once. And then, Thales saw Ralph's top and bottom lids move. They trembled and began moving towards the center. Thales heaved a sad sigh in his heart and slowly clenched the dagger in his hand. However, Ralph's eyelids only trembled and stopped in the middle of his eyes. There was one sliver of space left, but his eyelids did not close together. It remained that way for a long, long time. The man who was once the phantom wind follower saw a flash of a scene that was either familiar or unfamiliar to him in front of his eyes. There were barren fields and dirty mud roads full of stray dogs and flies. That was the countryside of Camus Union, where he fought to survive when he was young. During that incident, he was fighting for a black piece of bread against a gang of stray dogs, even though that bread had almost been completely devoured by a swarm of flies. Those stray dogs were really fierce. Ralph thought quietly in the dungeon. Their deafening growls, desperate bites, insane strength, however. Ralph subconsciously licked his upper teeth. That bread tasted really horrible. Thales saw that Ralph's expression was becoming distorted as it trembled. His eyelids slowly relaxed, widened, and returned to their original positions. Boom! Like a leaking balloon, Ralph's head, which was between the two clamplocks and which he had raised with great difficulty, suddenly fell backward. The back of his head hit the floor. In the end, he did not blink. Thales silently exhaled and slowly lowered the dagger in his hand. However, it was as if Ralph did not feel the pain on the back of his head and the cuts on his cheeks. His distorted face began trembling, along with his head. These were not moans. Thales could not help but be stunned. He saw Ralph shut his eyes in pain, his countenance trembled as he allowed the colorless liquid to slide down from his eyes ceaselessly. His voice was very depressing and sorrowful. He was crying. The phantom wind follower. Once, he was a powerful and endlessly praised psionic, man, and warrior. Now, he was shedding tears and crying. Was he crying because of his weakness, or was it because of the pain he was feeling? Right now, he was just like a common person, a normal person, or even a slightly weak citizen. He cried as if he could no longer bear with the burden of his pain. Thales could only watch in a daze. He watched as the man who could not talk nor breath normally fell on the floor and cried violently after passing up the chance to be freed. Thales turned away gloomily. However, he tightened his grip on the dagger in his hand. Ursula, Ned, and Kellett. The child beggars who died in the 6th house, who did not even possess a surname, appeared one by one before his eyes. He thought of his plight and then thought of Gilbert and Yodel. The boy furrowed his brows and lowered his head to look at his hands. The new cut felt familiar, just like the burning heat just now. At that moment, it was as if something settled within his heart. Thales drew himself close to Ralph's ear for the second time. I understand, he said softly. Ralph was still crying in a manner as if he was crushed by his burdens. Then, are you willing to free yourself from these shackles? Ralph's crying paused for a moment. It did not stop but slowly became softer. The little girl with the broken legs, and almost every single child who died in the abandoned houses in the past 4 years, flashed in front of Thales' eyes. Shrill cries and despaired wails rang from outside the prison cell again. This fucking world. Thales did not know what was inside the dungeon. However, his gaze when looking at Ralph became simpler and clearer. And then, Thales looked earnestly at the phantom wind follower who could not fly anymore and spoke with determination, free yourself from these shackles. And then, with this battered body, continue struggling in this world and strive to stay alive. See how much crueler the world can be. Are you willing? Ralph stopped crying. He was unable to move his head. He could only move his gaze to look at the boy beside him in a daze. He heard the boy speak slowly and clearly, this might not be freedom. There may be a huge price to pay. You could even die immediately. As for me, I am only doing this for myself. Thales then lowered his head and said slowly, however, I can try and give you a chance, let you leave these shackles behind and struggle to live one more time. Are you willing? Ralph stared hard into the boy's eyes. Although there were tears lingering in his eyes, at that moment, Ralph suddenly felt like laughing. He felt as if the pain in his throat and knees was slowly numbing. Those stray dogs. Those stray dogs that fought for the bread with him. Those stray dogs, in the end. Ralph managed to take a breath. A strange burst of joy bloomed in his heart. In the end. They faced a tragic end. Ralph, who was lying on the floor, raised his gaze again while trembling and stared straight at Thales. The next moment, the phantom wind follower slowly blinked, clearly, in a manner that there was no mistaking his action. Everyone has blinked their eyes countless times in their lives. These blinks were extremely insignificant. However, Ralph had perhaps performed the most important blink in his life. Ralph slowly lowered his head. Thales smiled, a lot of the gloominess in his heart dispersed. He nodded curtly. All right, I understand. At first, I thought Her Highness woke up ahead of schedule. But now, it seems like that is not the case. Chris frowned tightly in a dim room on the second floor of Vine Manor. Before him sat a network of countless blood vessels in a complicated pattern connected to a massive, brownish-black coffin that was as tall as a person, 3 meters wide and 6 meters tall. At that moment, an unbroken tremor shook the coffin from within. I tried to connect to Her Highness consciousness, but it still remains muddled and unclear. There was only hunger and killing instinct. No matter how I tried to communicate with and comfort her, it was still the same. Chris put a tube of blood down, his countenance became more and more solemn. If this continues, Her Highness will only use up her remaining strength and blood supply ahead of schedule. Rolana looked shocked. The red-headed blood clanswoman said anxiously, there must be something that stimulated Her Highness, but we did not do anything. Chris' eyes were shining with a bright light. The previous still and lifeless expression in his eyes had now disappeared without a trace. The old man spoke resolutely, not us. Her Highness only began having this reaction 5 minutes ago. At that time, Chris' expression changed drastically. As if he suddenly thought of something, he turned his head and shouted to Istron, who stood behind him with a solemn expression. That young child. Even we can smell the fragrance of his blood from 2 floors away. With Her Highness' sense of smell, it would have been, where is the young child? Istron was anxious and agitated. Looking at the excited Chris, he answered instinctively, just now, it seemed he accidentally cut himself. Then he pulled off the half-disabled supraclass phlebotomy device and said some weird things. I didn't listen closely. And then he... The expressionless Chris did not continue to listen to Istron's explanation. The vibrations and dull tapping sounds continued to resound from the suspicious coffin. The old man rudely and directly cut Istron off. Bring the child up. No, ISA, you stay here, let Rolana go. Looking at the gigantic coffin that was vibrating more and more vigorously, Chris' eyes shone with a strange light, as if there were sparks in them. What Her Highness craves for is his blood. This plan is very risky. Thales calmly explained to Ralph, who was on the floor. It was as if he had returned to the 6th house and was using everything at his disposal to protect those good, naive, and innocent child beggars who had been suffering in hell since they were born. However, it is more unwise to sit here and be vulnerable to capture while waiting for some miracle to happen. Ralph only quietly watched the boy whose gaze was so very different from the average person. With effort, he took a breath. That serious face of his, Ralph smiled in his heart and thought, definitely isn't inferior to Big Sister. The Phantom Wind follower was not aware that, after facing a choice between life and death, he felt a lot more at ease. Thales continued to explain detachedly as if he was not the one who was speaking. I don't know how much strength you have left, but I estimate that it wouldn't be a lot. And the capability of that old man, so neither both of us taking a reckless risk nor passively waiting would be ideal for the situation now. Our best and most opportune moment would be when my rescue army arrives. At the moment they break in. You won't be able to wait for your rescue army, little mortal brat. A cold female voice interrupted Thales. Ralph's face immediately tensed up. Thales was momentarily stunned. Then, he turned his head in disbelief and looked towards the door of the prison cell. Rolana Corleone stood outside the door, wearing a good-looking equestrian suit. She seductively grazed her lips with the index finger of her slim and beautiful right hand. At the same time, she yanked the lock of the cell door open with her now turned fearsome, sharp, clawed right hand. Istron told you before, right? That no matter what you do, we will be able to hear it, young sir who played a trick on Istron. As if mocking him, Rolana laughed lightly and, with her attractively slim body, took elegant and sexy steps from the open cell door into the prison cell. Too bad. Perhaps, after you grow a few years older, even I will be seduced by you. But right now, you are about to become Her Highness' fragrant and condensed energy drink. Perhaps the adorable Rolana would be able to take a sip too? Looking at Rolana, who appeared suddenly, Thales understood that she could subdue him at any time. The boy heaved a deep sigh that seemed sincere and regretful. Ralph, he said mildly, without a trace of anxiety in his voice, I need 10 seconds. 10 seconds? Suddenly, Rolana felt uneasy. She thought of Istron, who had been duped. What other cards could he have in his hands? The half-disabled superclass mortal creature who was trapped in the Nightwing stone lock? However, the cunning Rolana did not want to take risks. Her expression immediately became fierce and determined. This little devil, he's trying to make himself sound mysterious. In an instant, her attractive figure appeared before Thales' eyes. Wait till Her Highness sucks you dry into a mummy. See if you can still. But at that moment, a gust of strange, violent wind stirred up in the tiny prison cell. Whoosh! The fire on the torches swayed, and there were even a few times where they were almost extinguished. The violent wind made Rolana stagger 3 steps backward. In deep shock, she immediately grabbed onto the bars beside her and stood her ground with all her might. Is this psionic ability? Impossible, it is impossible that this child is a psionic. Then, it has to be. With effort, Rolana looked towards the superclass elite who was locked onto the floor beside Thales by the Night Windstone lock. It has to be him. Surprisingly, he still retained some strength, even in this state. It's useless. Rolana relaxed and thought cheerily, you are all locked up and heavily injured. Even if you have a psionic ability, how long can it last? On the other hand, that young trickster, later, even if I have to risk being reprimanded by Chris, I still want to drink a mouthful of your blood first. I will definitely make sure I leave a deep impression of it on you. Rolana thought furiously. Then, let's begin. Thales looked in front of him, at Rolana who was impeded by the violent winds. With a serene expression, he turned his dagger over. 10. Under Ralph's puzzled gaze, he grabbed the dagger's blade with his unblemished right hand. 9. Good luck to both of us, he said. 8. My first mystic ability trial. 7. It starts now. 6. Thales stared at the black, stone shackles that held Ralph, but Ralph's face was red. He stared fixedly at Rolana, and the violent billows continued to buffet. With a cold facade, Rolana grabbed tightly onto the bars beside her. Her left hand began transforming into fearsome, bright red claws. 5. I want to break his shackles, Thales thought quietly. And save this man who has nothing left. 4. If it is just as I predict it to be. Thales recalled various life and death situations in his mind. Such as when Quide's hand strangled his neck. When Asda's hand slowly tightened. And the bloody scene in his distant memory, as well as the gentle person who still harbored all those adolescent delusions who existed in his memory, and whose name he could not remember. 3. Thales grit his teeth and closed his eyes. His right hand abruptly grabbed onto the metal hasp. A wave of burning heat appeared from the metal. But he clenched his teeth and endured it. Rolana felt something. She turned her head in shock as she realized that the grill she had grabbed onto was vibrating. What's going on? The Blood clanswoman thought anxiously. That half-crippled man, how strong is his psionic ability? 2. Bang! The bar, along with Rolana's hand, shattered into countless tiny pieces. As Rolana, who could no longer stand steadily, pressed onto the severed wound on her arm and screamed shrilly, she was blown out of the dungeon by the violent wind summoned by the psionic ability in an instant. 1. Rolana's shrill and crazed growl resounded beside his ears. The burning sensation attacked her. 0. Light. Thales thought with his now hazy consciousness, so much light. In the room on the second floor with the huge coffin, Chris' countenance suddenly turned strange. What is Rolana trying to do? He said coldly, looking at the gigantic coffin that kept emitting dull tapping sounds. Perhaps she's getting a taste of the food, Istron answered carefully. He could feel the elder's anxiousness. He continued speaking, towards delicacies, she had always, no. They are. Istron's words were cut off by something from the outside world as their expressions turned into that of shock. Boom. A loud bang that sounded like an explosion echoed from underground. A cloud of dust burst in violently from outside the door. The two Blood clansmen, both young and old, changed expressions at the same time. Then, they exchanged glances. Something happened in the dungeon. The next moment, they appeared outside the manor. When Istron saw the scene in front of his eyes clearly, he opened his mouth wide in shock, in a manner that was completely uncharacteristic of him. Under the moonlight, the superclass mortal creature without legs and who had a tattoo on his face, the man who was once the phantom wind follower, my dear Ralph, was seen to have escaped from all his shackles. He was flying in the sky by riding on the violent winds while holding the little mortal child tightly under his armpit with a determined expression on his face. Not far away, while Gilbert was riding a horse and leading 30 swordsmen of eradication who charged at full throttle, his expression changed. Bloodline lamp. Amidst the whirling sound of the wind, he spoke in a low voice to the female official beside him. Jins, who was galloping along with her horse, looked at the bloodline lamp in Gilbert's arms with a solemn expression. The flame of the lamp became red. It was slanted. That direction, Gilbert recalled. His expression was solemn. It's Covendir family's Vine Manor. The female official growled angrily and whipped her mount. Who cares about which family it belongs to? Even if we are facing the Extet's Walton family. We still have to break in. Gilbert nodded, a determined and fierce expression appearing on his face. All teams, change direction and follow me. No need to preserve horsepower. Charge forward with increased speed. Prepare for battle. Chapter 29, The Hand That Reached Out from the Coffin. Ever since Asda disappeared, Thales had not truly tried out that power of his, which he had apparently lost control over. He did not know how mystics control their powers. He did not even understand how mystic energy worked. He was only modeling the scene to be as similar as possible to his last experiences of losing control, based on his earlier induction and inference, and tried to put his power to use. Originally, in Thales' plans, this power was supposed to be probed and investigated step by step in secret and when he was safe. It was also supposed to be done in his calm and safe living environment after he gained a rough understanding of the origins of mystic abilities and mystics from Gilbert's lesson, and after he considered the reaction of the people around him regarding him losing control over his power. However, due to the impending doom and Ralph's utterly miserable condition, he decided to start this mystic ability test which might bring about danger in advance. Blood had acted as a medium with the previous 2 times he lost control by bringing the dagger, which was a material object, and the mysterious sphere, which was an energy, before him in a mysterious manner. Hence, he made a tentative guess that the power might be related to dimensional teleportation. As long as I can shift the stone shackles has to the side of my hand. Thales silently uttered in his heart. The process of the experiment was easier than he expected. The burning sensation inside his body became stronger and stronger. The stone shackles became even larger right before his eyes. More and more scenes appeared in his mind. Then Thales lost consciousness. When he opened his eyes, he felt the moonlight, heard the sound of the wind, felt the cold, and saw the extremely shocked BloodClansman on the ground. Whereas he was already held in Ralph's bosom, and beneath his feet, the ground became further and further away. Even though the process was a little strange, Thales thought tiredly, looks like the experiment was successful. Although Ralph cut a sorry figure and was in pain, he had already escaped the burden of the heavy shackles. He forcefully manipulated the wind and drifted upwards. No one was more shocked than Chris at that moment. How was that possible? The old BloodClansman muttered with a dull gaze. Istron and Rolana were still young, so he was the only one who knew that the Nightwing stone lock used to lock the superclass elite in the dungeon was an heirloom of the Corleone family that had been passed down for almost 1,000 years. It was an instrument of torture that belonged exclusively to BloodClan dukes. Only the fresh blood of the person who closed the lock could open it. That lock was used to restrain supreme class elites. It was originally used to prevent the deranged highness from going into a frenzy. After her highness condition stabilized, it was used on the superclass blood source. Even the most advanced mystic gun could not destroy those shackles. How did they open it? Before attaining such grave injuries, Ralph was favored by the wind. He could even lie on his back with his limbs facing up for 5 minutes while he was 10 meters high in the air with the flow of the wind. But now, after having a considerable amount of blood drawn out, he was extremely weak. He was also tired and parched. The fact that he suddenly lost both his legs also affected his balance. The immense pain in his throat distracted him. The psionic ability he was so proud of was mostly used to maintain his breathing where the air was transferred from his throat to his lungs. He knew that he had no chance of victory against the 3 BloodClansmen and that what Thales had just initiated was only a temporary measure, which was supposed to be a backup plan. Hence, after Ralph escaped the shackles, the only thing he thought of doing was to continue rising with the help of the wind to a height that the BloodClansmen cannot reach. If they managed to catch up, he would use all his might to whip them off with violent gusts. However, he still underestimated Chris, who had been a supreme class elite since hundreds of years ago. Chris did not let his shock slow down his movements. His age of 1,000 years made him even stronger. His dried-up facade grew dark and in an instant, he jumped and instantly reached a height of 10-something meters away from the ground before he pounced on the people in the air. For her highness, I must snatch that young child back. In an instant, he had drawn close to Ralph. He could see a gust of strong wind rushing towards him. With shock, Thales saw Chris, whose clothes and hair were ruffled by the strong winds, and with an indifferent face, he transformed into a blood-colored mist. It was not liquid blood like what Istron became, but a blood mist. Thales saw the blood mist scatter as Ralph blew on it. However, it continued spreading upwards and passed through the protective screen of strong wind built by Ralph without any obstacles. The blood mist seeped through the wind and arrived in front of Ralph. Under Ralph and Thales' solemn gazes, it slowly transformed back into the pale-faced, old man, who had an expression on his face that was difficult to read. The old man began falling again. Ah, Ralph could not speak, and could only growl furiously. He raised his left hand and strengthened his psionic ability, trying to blow the old man from the sky. But before he finished growling, Chris Corleone's hand had already grabbed Ralph's left wrist. Those born without wings should not dream of flying. Chris' tone was a lot colder than the high-altitude temperature as he spoke eerily. Snap. The sound of Ralph's bones snapping and his painful howl rose into the air 20-something meters above the ground together. And then, Istron, who was on the ground, and Rolana, who held her half-regenerated arm as she rushed out of the dungeon with a dirt-covered face, saw Chris seizing Ralph, who held Thales to his bosom, by the left hand and then dragging Ralph and Thales towards the ground with fearsome strength. Ah! Ralph looked as if he had gone crazy. With all his might, he drove the wind upwards, almost forgetting to breathe. But he still could not shrug off Chris' sharp claws which had pierced through his carpal bones and tightly restrained his wrist. Thales was buffeted by the strong winds to the point that he could not open his eyes. His whole body was devoid of energy and he had used up all available cards at his disposal. The boy had long since become incapacitated. Finally, Ralph, who fought adamantly, was inevitably dragged down from the sky by Chris. Ralph lost his balance. Having exhausted almost all his strength, he tried his best to manipulate the wind, but Chris' great strength made it impossible for him to rise into the air again. For her highness, the young child must be kept alive. Chris said coldly as he descended from the sky, holding on tightly to Ralph. With a face full of hatred, Rolana licked her teeth. She extended her newly regenerated arm and smiled, preparing to catch the child. Istron had a stronger perception compared to her. As he stood beside her, his expression changed, and he abruptly looked outside the main door of the manor. There, an intense vibration was approaching. Rolana, Istron spoke with slight anxiety, but Rolana kept her full concentration on the two people in the air. Thales did not dare open his eyes, but the increasingly swift sound of wind and the heightening sense of weightlessness indicated that things were going badly. Did he still end up making this move too early due to the sudden, unforeseen circumstance? Ralph had already given up trying to shake off Chris' hand. Looking at the moon that was getting further and further, and at the approaching ground, Ralph's gaze slowly became filled with clarity, brightness, and relief. At that moment, Ralph suddenly realized that after experiencing so much suffering, the fracture in his wrist was not really painful at all. The corners of the Phantom Wind follower's lips curled into a smile that had been absent on him for a long time. What a pity, child. Thank you for the chance you gave me. At least I did struggle. As for those vampires, they won't have the chance to touch you. It was as if time slowed down. And then, Rolana, who was preparing to catch Thales on the ground, saw in shock that the half-crippled Ralph began howling and growling the instant he was about to hit the ground. With one hand, he threw Thales using all his strength towards the direction of the manor house. No! Chris growled furiously and gracelessly. Ralph, who now had a free hand, grabbed onto Chris' waist tightly and hurled him towards the ground. Thales could only feel his downward momentum changing as his body involuntarily flew towards another direction. In an instant, the stone wall of the house appeared before him, becoming closer and closer. His head was about to crash into it. Thales could only shut his eyes tight. Is it going to end just like this? However, to the boy's surprise, the miserable scenario where his skull would shatter into pieces did not happen. His momentum was suddenly halted and his head felt dizzy. He then dropped into a steady and safe embrace. Boom! Ralph and Chris fell hard on the ground. The huge impact even smashed and broke the ground. Dust swirled in the air of the open space outside the manor. Rolana's expression changed drastically. She went for Thales, who was flying in the direction of the house. Her figure flickered and reached him in an instant, whereas Istrone looked at the manor's main door with a grim gaze. As his eyes sparkled, his voice rang through the entire manor in the quiet night. Enemy attack! Thales dizzily and slowly opened his eyes in the arms of a person which felt familiar and strange at the same time. In front of him were two dark-colored lenses on a dark purple mask. They looked towards him under the moonlight. Do not worry, Thales, standing on the second-floor balcony of the manor house, the royal secret protector, Yodel Cato, spoke hoarsely with a slight tremble in his voice. You are safe now. Thales smiled tiredly with relief. He closed his eyes and became completely at ease. Waves of vibrations densely packed with one another rang clearly from outside. Boom! The main door of Vine Manor was crashed open. Countless hoofbeats rushed in. In the name of Constellation's Supreme King, Kessel Jadestar. Count Gilbert Queso's steady and sonorous voice rang above the dust and hoofbeats. All present personnel in Vine Manor are suspected of being involved in the theft and subsequent hiding of a royal treasure. Surrender now and do not resist. Whoever disobeys will be killed where they stand. In a dark chamber with only boundless darkness and not even a single torch, two breathing sounds that seemed faint and indistinct could be heard. What a pity, this is probably the closest we have been to the air mystic in the past 12 years, an aged and acrid voice spoke. However, all information showed that someone has gotten rid of Asda, a light and clear male voice echoed. Then let me guess, you, who think someone has gotten rid of him, has probably also read about how mystics are immortal, the old and acrid voice mocked. Don't be so stern, teacher. The light and clear voice continued speaking, at the very least, he has been sealed. The problem is, who, in Eternal Star City right now, has the capability or weapon to seal Asda, the hoarse, drawling voice continued the question. It must be none other than those few, the light and clear voice spoke playfully. True. Ha! The hoarse and acrid voice seemed to have a hint of disappointment as it echoed in the air. It's none other than them, only those few. You do not have to continue investigating the truth regarding the Red Street Market incident anymore. All records, including those regarding the massive explosion in the central area, and the witness report of that woman who was piggybacking a child, shall be sealed permanently. As for Asda Sekern, make full preparations. The Paramount Sword is not complete. Whether it takes 10 or 20 years, the air mystic will eventually return, the hoarse and acrid voice ordered sullenly. There was a long silence. Don't make that face, teacher. To think of it positively, we have lost one arch-enemy. To think of it even more positively, we might be able to draw out the blood mystic, the light male voice spoke languidly. Don't pretend that you can see my expression, the hoarse and acrid voice said with dissatisfaction. He then heaved a sigh. The blood mystic. Ha, this accursed fate. The capital city will probably be in chaos again soon. 12 years ago, at least I had Lance, Jins, Thyson, and Lanzar Nov beside me. Now, the only manpower I have is you. The hoarse voice's sigh was filled with solitude and loneliness. However, 12 years ago, even though you were all there, the late king still died, didn't he? Obviously, strength is not the key, luck is. The light voice seemed to talk about the tragedy 12 years ago without any qualms. In the dark, both voices were silent for a long time. Yes, even with what we had 12 years ago, the late king still died. The hoarse voice finally answered. This time, his tone seemed to be full of grief and indignation. By the way, Secret Room sent someone to pass us an anonymous letter. The letter said that yesterday, a member of the gang was spotted leaving Extet and departing for Constellation, towards Eternal Star City. The old woman who delivered the letter also said that the letter was to pay a debt of gratitude towards you. The light voice seemed to finally realize the odd atmosphere and stiffly changed the topic. Ah, the long-anticipated collaboration between the Secret Intelligence Department and the Secret Room. It seemed that the interest of the hoarse and acrid voice was piqued. Coming to the capital city at this time? The blood mystic? No. I've sent some people to investigate it. It appears to be a doctor from Blackstreet Brotherhood, Ramon. He's problematic? Somebody saw him perform a little trick while on a village path. Little trick? The hoarse voice finally became solemn. Yes, a little trick, the light male voice replied with cynicism. After I read through everything contained in the Deep Knowledge Reserve and all 20 floors of the Jade Star Library, my conclusion is that, for this little trick that can heal wounds in an instant, 1,000 years ago, it was known as. His light voice immediately became deep. Magic. His voice slowly faded away. Only then did the darkness in the chamber truly sink into a deathly still silence, like a cemetery at midnight. After a long time, the old voice said, "That old woman." The hoarse voice chuckled lightly. "I can't believe she gave me this information as a debt of gratitude. She is indeed as cunning as she always was." Gilbert led the guards, consisting of swordsmen of eradication, and they all rode on horses as they barged into the manor. They surrounded the 3 members of the Blood Clan. Unsheathe the silver swords, prepare to fight the enemy. Gilbert said nothing more. He knew that his declaration of sparing those who surrender earlier was merely a formality. Often, the only effective methods are strength and weapons. Just like diplomacy. Rolana. Istron avoided 2 sword blades that had immediately attempted to take his head in a flash. He shouted anxiously and furiously, "Summon the Shadow Guards." Rolana landed on a window on the 2nd floor. She was extremely furious, neither her unparalleled body nor devastating sharp claws could do anything to Yodel, who kept appearing and disappearing from view while he held Thales in his arms. She was also aware of the situation at hand, which was why she decided to spread her arms wide open and emitted voiceless howls with a strange rhythm towards the direction of the dungeons. Boom, boom. Suddenly, quaking sounds that were packed so closely to each other that they sounded like thunderstorms boomed from the dungeon. Gilbert's expression changed. He decisively waved the long sword in his hand. The swordsman beside him shouted loudly in unison. But it was too late. A black swamp suddenly burst out the entrance of the dungeon. It dashed towards the horse formation formed by the 30 swordsmen of eradication. Form a ring. Gilbert saw the thing dashing towards them clearly, and shouted loudly with a ghastly expression, "They are blood slaves." The 30 swordsmen of eradication who were all at least above ordinary class also saw the things dashing out. The black swamp was made up of creatures with frenzied faces and blood-red eyes. Almost all the swordsmen present were guards with plenty of experience on the battlefield. They knew what the creatures before them were. They were blood clansmen that belonged to the lowest and most inferior class in the clan. They were originally humans or other races who had then received the blood essence of blood clansmen and transformed into hungry, frenzied, and loyal blood slaves who are unafraid of death. More than 10 blood slaves swarmed towards the horse formation like a flood. Gilbert assessed the situation clearly. He knew that Thales was already safe, but relying blindly on horsepower and dashing towards these fearless creatures would only increase their casualties. "Stand still," he ordered loudly. "Whoa!" The 30 swordsmen of eradication yelled angrily. They dismounted and formed a round formation quickly. All the guards stepped out with their left foot and slanted the swords on their right, protecting the person beside them. This was the defense formation Constellation was famous for, the returning light formation. At that moment, a figure slowly stood up from the hole smashed by Ralph and Chris. And then, in the blink of an eye, the figure disappeared in a flash. "Please wait here for a moment and take a short rest." Yodel put Thales down on the 2nd floor balcony lightly. He saw Chris, whose figure showed up in the dust, and also his subsequent disappearance. "We will take care of the rest." Then Yodel disappeared in front of Thales, too. The next moment, Yodel's dark-colored short sword with that crisscrossing crossguard appeared in the air. It clashed fleetingly with Chris' sharp pair of claws as he dashed towards the 2nd floor, producing a spark. Clang! The jarring sound pounded on everyone's eardrums. But there were strangely no collisions of air were formed due to the clash of their weapons. Yodel and Chris can be considered as the 2 best Supreme Class elites in the Western Peninsula. Having dueled once, they had roughly understood each other's capabilities. They moved away from each other. This is the ability to move through shadows. Chris' countenance was cold. He dug his right claws into a wall of the 1st floor and secured himself onto it. As someone who is at the peak of Supreme Class, even if it's in Constellation, you shouldn't have been a nobody. "Is it because you are shielded by the overly brilliant rays of the kingdom's wrath?" the old man said coldly. He was totally unconcerned with the battle between the blood slaves and the guards. It seemed that all his energy was focused on Thales, who was on the 2nd floor. Yodel did not say anything, nor show any emotions as usual. His mysterious figure was lightly perched on the panel of a window on the 1st floor, projecting an illusory quality. He looked unsteady, but he never fell. In the courtyard, the blood slaves and the circular formation of guards were finally engaged in hand-to-hand combat. Bam! The first dull thud came from an intense clash between a blood slave and a guard. The guard used the double-edged short sword beside his body to angrily slash open the blood slave's body. But the blood slave slashed open the guard's armor, completely indifferent of what would happen to its claws and nails. The same scenario quickly happened at every part of the circular formation. The situation immediately became chaotic. Amid the chaos, Thales noticed Rolana Corleone leaping towards him while growling furiously, but she was stopped halfway by a long, silver-colored metal chain that sliced through the air in a zigzagging manner and was forced to take 2 steps back. "Your battlefield is here, blood-sucking whore." Following the furious words, Thales saw a black-haired woman around 40 years old, wearing a suspicious, light blue, female official uniform. He did not know her at that time. She angrily whipped the chain in front of Rolana. Rolana chuckled coldly, and as she moved in a flash, tried to leap away from the area that can be reached by the chain's word. However, as she moved, the chain fell on her and wrapped around her neck tightly. The part of her neck that was entangled by the chain was even emitting a hissing, green smoke. This chain's word is made of silver, whore. The female official, Jins, growled with an unpleasant expression. I really threw in a lot of my savings to prepare a nice treat for you people. At that moment, with blood-red eyes, Istron transformed into liquid blood and rose into the air, dashing towards Thales. Clang! Istron growled angrily and, crossing his hands, which were in the shape of claws, deflected a silver sword that shot straight towards his chest. Sir! Gilbert had dismounted and moved through the blood slaves while working with 3 swordsmen of eradication before he arrived at the door to the ground floor and stood firmly there. He looked at Istron with a displeased expression and raised the silver sword in his hand, striking a standard pose one makes when inviting someone for a duel. Please stay away from that child. The skirmish between the blood slaves and the swordsmen was still ongoing. However, in the midst of his fatigue, as Thales watched the 3 blood clansmen, who repeatedly charged towards him but were continuously stopped by their troublesome opponents, the boy suddenly understood something. What they want isn't me, but something on the second floor. He thought silently. They must have an Achilles heel there. The sounds of battle between the blood slaves and swordsmen continued. The 3 blood clansmen and the 3 warriors were also engaged in fierce battle. Having thought of this, with an uncertain and fearful gaze, but still full of determination, Thales abruptly pushed open the balcony door. After pushing open the door, his weak body immediately collapsed inside the room. Thud. However, a dull and strange tapping sound attracted the boy's attention. While panting lightly, Thales raised his head. Borrowing the moonlight from outside the balcony, he gradually saw the dim room clearly. Especially the thing in the middle which was connected to countless blood tubes and covered with complicated patterns and obscure words. It was a gigantic, black coffin. Thud. Thud. As if roused by something, the dull tapping sound within the black coffin grew more and more violent, and also increasingly fierce. Thud. Thud. Bang. Bang. Thales suddenly realized that his act of pushing open the door and entering was more or less a little careless. Until, boom. An incredibly loud sound shot into the air. Thales fell backward from the vibration and his eardrum rang. As if there were some horrifying internal explosion, the cover of the black coffin abruptly shot upwards and fell onto the floor. Holding his aching ears, Thales clenched his teeth and got up. He saw that at some point, something had extended out from the edge of the black coffin which had lost its cover. It was dried up, charred black, and ominous, hand. Chapter 30, Battle of the Supreme Class. Yodel instinctively felt that things were not right. This was because after confronting and probing him for a short time, the blood clansman who attacked fiercely despite being old and gray-haired suddenly became passive along with his juniors. They were no longer attacking, advancing, and disappearing in a frenzied manner anymore, neither were they manipulating the blood slaves with undetectable voices. That was until Gilbert's voice spoke anxiously, Yodel. Even though they did not usually get along well, Yodel immediately understood what Gilbert meant. The masked secret protector raised his head. He saw Thales pushing open the door on the balcony that led indoors and disappearing into the darkness of the house. Thales, why? As the mechanical gears behind his crystal drop glass lenses started spinning, Yodel's field of vision rapidly zoomed into the second floor. However, the room was so dark that he could not see the situation inside at all. Yodel's heart became restless. His figure disappeared in an instant. In an obscure gray world, a gray moon slowly emerged. Next, a gray metal door appeared out of thin air, followed by a gray garden connected to it with gray walls, gray windows, gray houses, and other gray things. In an instant, a gray vine manor that looked exactly like the vine manor in reality, apart from the strange coloring, appeared out of thin air in this world. After an unknown amount of time passed, layers of ripples visible to the naked eye appeared and propagated from a point in the sky like the water's surface when skimmed by a dragonfly, in a manner as if the sky was pulled away. Finally, a normal-colored Yodel softly emerged into the gray world from the center of the ripple and trod the similarly gray vine manor. He stepped onto the world that was almost the same as the real world in terms of the shape and structure of objects except that it was void of any signs of life, and began his gray, deathly silent journey. The masked protector expertly jumped from window to window and rapidly rose towards Vine Manor's second floor in the shadowy world. He needed to hurry and reach the room on the second floor through this shadow world. However, when he was a few meters away from stepping on the second floor balcony's stone handle, Yodel suddenly paused for a moment, because a moment ago, he felt as if someone had dropped a heavy punch on every corner of the gray path of shadows. Resonance. These 2 words appeared in Yodel's mind. Such a familiar feeling. He furrowed his brows slightly and aborted the climb. In the next moment, like swift thunder, Yodel kicked the gray walls of the gray house hard with his left foot and soared into the sky like a swallow, then somersaulted towards the back. Strangely, ripples in space one appeared a few meters below the gray balcony where Yodel had stepped on. It spread with the vibrations, collapsing all the gray house's walls around it. The ripples took on a horrifying blood-red color. In an instant, the blood-red color swept over the thoroughly gray path of shadows. Yodel, who was somersaulting in the air, sighed in a barely noticeable manner. Transparent ripples in space appeared throughout his whole being. These ripples on Yodel offset the blood-colored ripples that tried to attack him. In a few seconds, he disappeared into space and reappeared in the real world. Below the observation deck on Vine Manor's second floor, a large space in the air was shrouded in blood mist. The blood mist contracted periodically as if vibrating with order. Yodel suddenly emerged amid this strange vibration. After emerging, Yodel somersaulted, looked at the blood mist around him and frowned while he was in the air. It has been 12 years since someone managed to artificially force him out of the path of shadows again. And it was through the same method used 12 years ago. An ambush prepared a long time ago was waiting for him. The blood mist stopped vibrating. A suffocating burst of air rapidly invaded, bringing with it countless droplets of blood. The blood mist conglomerate into an aged, blood-colored right hand in the air, throwing a seemingly light palm strike at Yodel, who was airborne and had no strength. The strike was aimed straight at his chest and abdomen. But before the strike approached, the clothing on Yodel's chest and abdomen emitted a mysterious hissing sound and fragmented into pieces one by one in the air. Upon careful observation, it can be seen that the blood-colored palm was surrounded by tiny droplets of blood in the blood mist that corroded everything that blocked it. For example, Yodel's heart. Since he was stuck in the air, he was unable to evade it. Neither could the path of shadows protect him anymore. In the air, Yodel, who was faced with imminent disaster, could only calmly hide his chest and abdomen, curling his body into a weird shape to delay the palm's direct impact on it. A little more than barely a second passed. A lot of things happened in this period of a little more than 1 second. The dark-colored short sword suddenly appeared in Yodel's right hand. In the blink of an eye, Yodel waved the sword in his hand and made 3 continuous chopping motions. None of the 3 attempts hit the dangerous blood-colored palm. However, the gears behind Yodel's crystal drop glass lenses were spinning rapidly. The tiny droplets of blood in that blood mist that scattered all over the air manifested in his sight with nowhere to hide. Yodel's waving of the short sword had delivered a blow that caused a tremor in that terrifying blood fog, causing them to shiver so much that 3 ripples that could not be seen by the average human eye appeared. The blood palm attacked without obstruction. 1 more second and it would hit. The gears behind Yodel's lenses started spinning in another direction. The color of the crystal drop lenses changed together with his field of vision. The 3 ripples caused the blood mist around them to vibrate. Behind the blood-colored palm, a special blood droplet spun without order amid the vibrations. The next moment, Yodel thrust his short sword at the disorderly blood droplets with an unbelievable speed. Clang! The tip of the sword gently touched the palm that was made of blood mist, and then quickly retracted. Not an ounce of strength was wasted, but not an ounce of energy was held back either due to his being miserly. On the palm of blood mist, a medium-sized blood droplet vibrated and shattered. Next, the blood-colored palm which had originally been fierce and threatening, and which would have hit Yodel's chest in 0.something seconds, collapsed into nothingness in an instant. Yodel landed lightly on the ground. On the left side of his chest and abdomen, a piece of clothing that had been badly corroded and torn by the blood mist became fluttering ash. A concealed stretch of muscle was revealed, the skin on the surface was totally corroded and fresh blood was oozing out of it. On the other hand, the blood mist that filled the air conglomerated towards the back along with the bloody palm that fragmented. Chris Corleone's deadly still figure conglomerate in front of Yodel once again. However, the conglomeration did not include his right palm. Yodel ignored the wound on his chest, letting the blood flow uncaringly and soak the hem of his shirt until his muscles contracted on its own to prevent the corroded wound from bleeding any longer. Chris furrowed his brows. With a flick of his right arm, a reddish, new, skeletal hand regenerated from his severed wrist, which was covered with blood mist. Then, sinew and skin regenerated on the skeletal hand at a speed visible to the naked eye. Yodel's chest wound looked more severe, but Chris' newly regenerated right hand looked as good as new. But a depressing cloud of emotions seemed to have filled Chris' heart. He knows. In the fierce battle between supreme-class elites which would have decided their lives and deaths in an instant, the prideful immortal already lost to this mortal behind the mask. Initially, Yodel disappeared into his path of shadows and vanished from this world, but he was continuing onward on the other side of the world. But after that, Chris turned the omnipresent blood mist into millions of blood droplets that created a sudden burst in uniform resonance, forcefully blasting away the masked elite from the shadow that only he could use. Yodel, whose path was suddenly cut off, fell into Chris' trap in midair. With the origin blood bringing it together, the blood mist, which had weak corrosion power fused into it, conglomerated into a more concentrated palm and attacked Yodel. Yodel had nowhere to draw strength from, no way to evade, and no way of entering the shadows. He fell into an absolutely disadvantageous position. However, in an instant, Yodel managed to win over a little more than a second by rapidly changing his position. In this short amount of time, Yodel identified the position of the origin blood among the thousands of tiny blood droplets and destroyed it, at the same time shattering Chris' right hand. The victorious and defeated parties in this battle of the supreme class were hence decided. Yodel only lost a palm-sized piece of skin and some venous walls. However, under Yodel's sword, Chris lost a drop of origin blood that signified the blood clan's exuberant vitality, and which would take over 100 years for a single drop to be formed. Chris heaved a sigh. What an exceptional young man. He's a fearsome member of the younger generation. Such beautiful skills and astonishing instincts. I was ignorant to have compared you with the kingdom's wrath earlier. As he spoke, Chris' figure again flashed around and evaded Yodel's phantom-like thrust. Even the kingdom's wrath would not have done better than you. Yodel paid Chris no heed. Instead, he stepped hard on the floor and rushed towards a window on the first floor. However, Chris was, again, blocking the path in front of him. But you are powerless to turn the tables now. Chris moved and dodged Yodel's attack. At the same time, he held him back from moving to the second floor. The immortal old man did not stop speaking, and his words were filled with the chilling observations that could only be possible from a person who had lived for a long time. Based on that boy's age, he is probably the most intelligent and calm mortal I've ever seen in my 600-something years of living. Chris, who had lost a drop of origin blood, no longer hoped to kill or even defeat this opponent. All Supreme Class elites were dangerous people with great strength and high levels of skill but could control their power at will. With just an exchange of a few blows, these two already knew the direction of the fight and how it would end. However, he could not let this person bother Her Highness while she feasted, especially when the mortal child could be the key to Her Highness awakening. It's a pity that his curiosity and his sense of danger is too great. Even if he knew that there were reinforcements, he still could not resist taking the initiative and attack in an attempt to save and defend himself. He probably can't resist the feeling of his fate being in someone else's hands. We've only made a few feints before he keenly noticed that the second floor might be where our weaknesses lie. His curiosity and his sense of danger made him push open the door, unable to resist. What he did not know was, that place was precisely where we hoped he would go. Her Highness needs his blood and his power. Young man, you are already too late. That mortal boy has already become Her Highness' strength at this point. A brilliant light shone in Chris' eyes, and for the first time, he referred to Thales with respect and admiration. Yodel's short sword trembled lightly. As Thales looked closely at the charred black hand that reached out from the strange black coffin, he froze for a whole 5 seconds. He had an intense flashback that, again, invaded his every brain cells, summoning a scene from nowhere that felt like déjà vu. He heard a voice, it was still that soft and feminine sound. This time, it was stern as it spoke. Wu Qiren, your grip is hurting me. We're just revisiting the classics, is there a need for you to be so scared? In Thales' ear, his past life's quivering voice during that time was filled with fear. I thought it was something like The Godfather, who knew you actually wanted to watch The Grudge at midnight? These are classics worth passing on to the next generation, okay? Look at Kayako, she's so adorable. Ag. Loosen your grip. My skin is tender. God damn it, she appeared. You have larger breasts, cover me. You only noticed my breasts are big now? What about usually arg? If you're afraid then close your eyes. I can't help it. By the way, can we please turn on the lights now? She climbed down. Wu Qiren. Be good and sit on the chair for me. Damn it. Madam. Don't stop the movie at this moment. I need to go up and down these stairs every day, alright? The moonlight was blocked by the black clouds. In the darkness, the flashback of his past life that happened for no reason was interrupted by a terrifying roar. Roar! This voice was like a person who had been dreaming about drowning suddenly jolting awake from their suspended animation states. But to Thales, who had been severely tormented by the memories of his past life, no matter how he heard that sound, it was like a shrill howl of a 1,000-year-old malicious spirit that had just resuscitated overnight. Thales suddenly recovered from his absent-minded state when he realized in a daze that the ghostly hand that held onto the edge of the coffin was climbing out swiftly along with that terrifying roar. A hand and wrist that looked like it belonged to a mummy. The small, charred black arm looked as if it was burned in hellfire, the badly damaged shoulder that looked as if it had been attacked by countless ants. All these things were revealed one after another outside the black coffin. This ghostly hand and the main body attached to it, which was now practically no longer in human shape, were slowly climbing out of the black coffin. That thing continued climbing out until a hair-raising skull appeared slowly out of the coffin under the dim moonlight. This emaciated skull had dry, withered, long, white hair, and a rotten, charcoal-black face. It had a disproportionate, large, black mouth, and the spot where the nose was supposed to be was a layer of darkness where the bottom could not be seen. Thales felt his goosebumps rise from his scalp before they traveled downwards and covered every inch of his skin right up to his fingertips. Hidden by the white hair, it opened its black, hollow mouth, which was dark and gaping until the edge of the mouth reached right below its ears. Roar! Its shrill cry traveled into Thales' ears from the direction right before him. Thales felt his skin crawl, and he almost collapsed onto the floor like jelly. This strange creature did not stop. It slowly but steadily crawled out of the black coffin as it fumbled about its surroundings. From the head to middle of the body, from the left arm to the right arm, the skull finally crossed the edge of the coffin and fell face down onto the ground. At last, that dry, ghoulish left hand lightly touched the ground. Thales' mind became blank. He trembled, slowly sucking in a mouthful of cold air. At this time, the skull that was touching the ground seemed to sense something. It paused for a moment, turned towards Thales' direction and slowly raised its head. The withered, white hair parted to the sides of its head, gently revealing its face directly to Thales. Where there was supposed to be eyes, Thales instead saw 2 irregularly large black holes. The boy almost fainted from fright. It looked like a mummy that was not completely burned. But it seemed like after the transmigration, his bountiful experience from the streets allowed him to be a lot more daring. Although Thales was afraid, he still managed to muster what remained of his rationale in his mind while shivering. No matter what that thing is, Thales trembled as he quietly thought to himself, I must run. Even though it looks scary, it isn't fast. I just have to. Thales tried his hardest not to think about the plots in the horror movies he watched in his past life. Spinning on the balls of his feet, twisting the comfortable child-sized shoes that Gilbert specially prepared for him, even though it was largely worn out after all the running about he did, he prepared to depend on his speed to escape this dangerous place. As long as I can last till Yodel's rescue, Thales thought, but the moment he moved his leather shoe, the ghoulish creature unexpectedly leaped out of the coffin. It was as if a headless ghost that had been moving about without purpose suddenly regained consciousness. Ah ah! The shrill cry resounded. Thales, who was now utterly terrified, turned tail and ran. Tap, tap. The pale-stricken Thales took 2 steps towards the balcony.